Chapter 248. Look, that's Lady Scroll. Piper quietly nudged Jilly with his elbow. I heard she's the Minister of Education. Minister of Education? The latter asked in confusion. What's that? She's the one who manages the teachers. Don't you like Teacher Philin the most and hate the loudmouthed Haben the most? Piper explained. Whether it's Philin or Haben, they're all managed by Lady Scroll. Where did you hear this? Jilly blinked her eyes. Is it the big man you mentioned? Of course, he smiled proudly, and I know more than that. Today's graduation ceremony will not only be attended by the officials of City Hall, but also by the Lord himself, His Royal Highness. Really? The little girl's eyes lit up. Will His Royal Highness talk to us? I don't know. Piper touched the back of his head. Probably. After all, he had heard it from his elder brother Van, who could be regarded as a great man. Originally, he was just an ordinary gravel worker in the old street, but after joining the militia, he immediately became a squad leader. Now, he was an officer in the artillery team of the First Army, with a monthly salary of up to 25 silver royals, and he had even shaken hands with His Royal Highness and talked to him. Although he lived in the barracks most of the time, when he occasionally came back, he always brought back a lot of novel and interesting stories and information. Every time this happened, Piper would come to his door and pester him with questions. As a former neighbor and admirer of his elder brother Van, Piper could often learn a lot of news from him in advance. For example, Van had personally told him that the Lord would attend the graduation ceremony. As early as a week ago, the First Army had received an order to protect and be on guard, and had also held a drill near the school building. Sure enough, not long after, a team of spirited, well-dressed soldiers walked over with their heads held high. The two people in the middle of the team were His Royal Highness and his chief knight. The crowd could not help but stir up a commotion. After the soldiers surrounded the entrance of the academy building, Roland walked into the hall and waved at the students lined up in rows. Greetings, my subjects. I am the Lord of Border Town, Roland Wimbledon, in charge of the Western region. Congratulations on completing the entire content of universal primary education and becoming the first batch of graduates of Border Town. The crowd was silent. It wasn't that they were indifferent, but most of them were so excited that they didn't know what to say. Jilly grabbed PYP's arm and pinched her. His Highness is talking to us. PYP was also very excited. In this way, he, like Big Brother Van, had been in close contact with His Highness. You were able to pass the test and graduate so quickly because most of you were once Teacher Carr Van Bate students. You were ahead of everyone else from the beginning. So don't be arrogant and complacent. There is still a lot of knowledge in this world waiting for you to explore and discover. Roland continued, Of course, this day is still worth celebrating. From today onwards, you have embarked on a path that is completely different from the others. No matter what kind of work he devoted himself to, he would be rewarded handsomely. Here, I would like to congratulate you. Long live His Highness. It was unknown who shouted first, but then everyone excitedly shouted, Long live His Highness. I am willing to serve His Highness. After waiting for the cheers to subside, Roland smiled and said, Next, I will issue you a diploma as proof of honor for the completion of your studies. He opened a booklet. PYP. PYP felt his whole body tremble. He looked at the prince and opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. Teacher Philin Schilt waved at him, Don't be afraid, come to His Highness. His hands and feet were stiff as he walked out of the line. He could even hear the sound of his heart pounding. Suddenly, he remembered the military salute that Van often mentioned. It was much simpler than the noble knight's salute, and could also express his loyalty. It was an etiquette invented by His Highness himself. Although he didn't know the specific posture, he still plucked up his courage, and according to his memory, he put his hand flat in front of his forehead. This action made the prince laugh. He nodded and handed the booklet to PYP. If you move your hand back a little bit and put it on top of your ear, it will be more standard. Congratulations on your graduation. Thank you. PYP took the booklet, and almost like a log, he walked back to the line. When His Highness began to issue graduation certificates to the others, he came back to his senses. Let me see what is written on it. Jilly asked curiously. You also have one, why are you so anxious? He muttered in a low voice, his hands trembling as he opened the cover of the certificate, only to see a beautiful piece of parchment sewn inside. In the upper left corner was his own head, in the middle was the royal emblem of Greycastle's spear, and there were also a few lines of text. If it was 6 months ago, he could only go to Teacher Carr to tell him the meaning of these characters, but now, PYP could already do the most basic reading and writing. He silently read it in his heart. First graduate of Border Town Academy, PYP. Scroll. Issued by Lord of Border Town, Roland Wimbledon. After all the graduation certificates had been issued, Roland clapped his hands, attracting everyone's attention. From now on, you can take on some jobs that ordinary people find difficult to do. These jobs have good pay. The lowest is calculated from 10 silver royals per month. Now, I would like to ask Lady Scroll to introduce the job content provided by Border Town City Hall. He raised his hand, stopping everyone's discussion. You don't have to make a choice immediately, you can go back and discuss it with your family first, and then bring your ID card and graduation certificate to the City Hall to apply. Taking advantage of Lady Scroll's introduction, Jilly leaned over and asked, Do you have an idea? I want to work in a bicycle factory. The salary is higher than my father's, and I also have the opportunity to get a new car for free. It's really great, PYP casually replied. Recently, four huge wooden signs had been erected in the town square, on which the portraits of His Highness and several ministers were painted. Several of the ministers were mounted on strangely shaped iron mounts, which had aroused a heated discussion among the townspeople. Moreover, the monthly salary of the bicycle factory was 15 silver royals. If it wasn't for the fact that only those who had completed primary education could apply, I'm afraid it would have already been crowded. But he also had a place he wanted to go. Ever since he had seen the award ceremony, PYP couldn't help but have such a thought. He also wanted to be like his former classmate Nana. One day he would be able to climb up to the square's platform, in front of thousands of people, and receive the honor personally awarded by His Highness. According to His Royal Highness, only those who had made outstanding contributions to the town would be eligible for the award. If he went to work in the bicycle factory, he was afraid that he would never have such an opportunity in his lifetime. Like Iron Axe, he couldn't lead an army in battle. He also didn't have the incredible ability of a witch. The only thing he could emulate was the chief alchemist Kyle Sichi. Before, he had heard more than once that if he could explore a practical alchemy product, he would be able to bring great wealth and prestige to the territory, and even achieve the title of a sage. He didn't need to be brave, nor did he need to look at his bloodline, he just needed a little bit of luck. There was no other path more suitable for him than this. Thinking of this, PYP made up his mind. Chapter 249. Even in the summer, the ice and snow on the Hermes Plateau did not melt much. Maine stood at the top of the Tower of Heaven and looked into the distance. Outside the city walls, there were only two colors of green grass and white snow intertwined with each other, like the scars left by the battle of the months of demons. There was no way to grow any crops in such a climate, so all the food needed by the new holy city had to be transported from the foot of the plateau, which was the old holy city. After staying in Hermes for more than 10 years, he had become accustomed to the ubiquitous cold. This time it's only the two of us? Taefun pushed open the door and entered. Is it okay to hold the meeting in the secret room? Do you like to be cooped up in that narrow room? No. Of course not. The old bishop stroked his white beard. If it weren't for Heather always talking about the rules and regulations, I would be happy to exchange information here every time. Even when she talks nonsense, I can at least enjoy the scenery of the holy city. Moreover, he revealed a smile. I didn't expect that a punctual person like her would be late this time. Maybe she encountered something difficult. Maine sat back at the table. Maybe she's already on her way. Maybe. Taefun curled his lips. You really shouldn't help her find an excuse. Everyone should do what they say. This is what she always says. Even if she encountered trouble, she should report it to us first. She didn't go to the kingdom of eternal winter alone. Sending a messenger is just a snap of the fingers. Don't worry about her. Maine pushed the 3 letters in front of Taefun. We have trouble. Trouble? The latter was startled, sat across the round table, and spread out the letters. All bad news? Yes, he took a deep breath. It can't get any worse. Taifun stopped smiling and began to carefully read the first letter. The spread of the demonic plague has been stopped, and the whereabouts of the Faceless One are unknown? Wait, what is the demonic plague? It's the latest research results of the pivotal secret area. You don't need to know too much about it, just think of it as a rapidly spreading disease, Maine simply explained. In fact, according to Master Crow-Eye, it was a kind of miniature demonic beast. After special cultivation, it produced a mutation that specifically targeted the human body. The holy elixir that restrained it was also a demonic beast, but its body was even smaller. The source of the disease cannot be directly observed by the eyes, and conventional means cannot cure it. There is only one kind that can stop the spread of the demonic plague. Witches. Taifun quickly thought of the answer. And more than one, he said in a deep voice. After reading the letter, the old bishop slammed his fist on the table. What is this idiot doing? Not only did he send the rats to encircle the mercenaries, he even sent the Faceless One. Does he know how important this pure witch is? His idea isn't wrong, Maine frowned. If the letter didn't lie about the number of people, then 1,000 rats would be enough to eat more than 100 mercenaries. However, the enemy seemed to have a powerful long-range crossbow that could be fired continuously. Regarding this point, I remembered that Priest Tyro, who was stationed at Longsong Stronghold, had also mentioned that the reason why the Duke Ryan was defeated by a group of miners was because of their extremely powerful crossbows. Although wearing heavy armor and holding a strong shield can greatly reduce the damage of crossbow bolts, rats do not have such equipment. Even if he wants to use those dregs, he shouldn't easily send Faceless One. Taifun angrily said, I'm afraid that when Heather comes back, she's going to make a lot of thunder. A witch that can grow into a pure witch, without exception, has an extremely rare ability, and it takes a lot of energy to cultivate them. In a sense, they are more precious than the God's Punishment Army. But the ultimate goal of both the witches and the God's Punishment Army is to destroy the enemy and win. Maine said slowly, it's inevitable that there will be losses in the process of using them. Don't tell me you want to save Priest Fairy? Don't forget the law of the church, Maine said in a heavy tone. Only the result is something that nobles love to do. Although Fairy failed miserably, his starting point and plan didn't have too many problems, only the enemy was more powerful. Of course, he will be punished, but the specific punishment measures will need to be further considered. But Heather may not think so. Taifun shook his head and opened the second letter. Don't forget, she is responsible for the church's arbitration. I will explain it to her. Not long after, the old bishop turned over the letter in his hand and said in disbelief, Timothy's militia troops attacked the Longsong Stronghold Church and then killed the emissary group? Is he crazy? The content of the second letter actually came from two sources. One was the report of the acting Perot of Longsong Stronghold, and the other was the local believers' information. Overall, there was indeed a militia from outside the Western Territory that attacked Longsong Stronghold and looted the church. Not only did they take the berserk pill, but their goal was also the medicine stored in the church. So the first point of judgment couldn't be wrong. This team was either from the new King Timothy or from the Queen of Clearwater Garcia. Comparing the two, it was obvious that the former was more likely. As for the latter point, Maine always felt that there was something strange. If according to the description in Perot's report, after burning the church, the other side immediately withdrew from Longsong Stronghold and disappeared, then how did they intercept and kill the members of the emissary group? At this time, the emissary group should have already arrived in Bordertown, so the two sides shouldn't have met. Seeing that Maine didn't say a word, Taifun quickly realized this point. He picked up the first letter and read it again. The wrinkles on his forehead piled up into a ravine. Could it be? After Roland Wimbledon got rid of the emissary group, he pushed all the blame to his brother Timothy Wimbledon? We might as well speculate, the Archbishop said after a moment of silence. Roland intended to obtain this batch of cheap people, so he assigned witches to treat the demonic plague and then transported all the refugees back to the Western Territory. And before that, In order to avoid being found out by the emissary group that he was raising witches, he sent a knight to raid the emissary group's camp, so that they didn't even have time to send out a carrier pigeon, and then he pushed the responsibility to the stronghold attackers. After all, the agent Perot was supported by Roland, so it was natural that he helped him fake it. Of course, all of this is speculation, but the disappearance of the emissary group is really too suspicious, and we don't have the energy to send another emissary group. In that case, we should immediately send troops to punish his arrogant behavior, Taifun said in a cold voice. Even if the emissary group has nothing to do with him, these witches who went to the Western Territory are still worth cleaning up. Maine didn't respond, but pointed to the third letter. You'd better read the last letter first. Taifun looked at him with a puzzled expression, then spread out the letter. Soon, his hands began to tremble, and finally he almost couldn't hold the thin paper. A large number of witches appeared in the fjords, and all the churches were destroyed? Then this letter is from the Sea Dragon Bay, which was also the last church to be broken into. Maine closed his eyes and leaned on the chair, his voice suddenly full of exhaustion. It's impossible for a large number of witches to appear in the fjords without warning, so there's only one possibility: they migrated from the mainland. Moreover, the letter also mentioned the extraordinary, and the church's law clearly stipulated that once traces of extraordinary witches' activities were found, the priority must be to send out the gods' punishment army to capture them. But the Fjords Islands were really too far away, and now that the battlefield in the kingdom of Wolfheart was in a state of anxiety, he simply had no time to care about the affairs on the other side of the strait. Do you want to ask His Holiness the Supreme Pontiff? Taifun asked. Maine slightly shook his head, completely suppressing the surging feeling of powerlessness in his heart. Perhaps this was God's test for the church. Only by cutting through thorns and thorns could they see the truth of God. He opened his eyes, once again regaining his calmness. Hermes, I'll leave the holy city to you and Heather. Don't tell me you want to go to the fjords? The old bishop stared. I will lead the 100 gods' punishment army soldiers and the pure witches to thoroughly clean up the western territory of Grey Castle, and then look for an opportunity to deal with the witches of the fjords. But the law says, Maine interrupted, that is the case when extraordinary people appear in the four kingdoms. Now that they are far away from the sea, they won't have any impact on our plan. Don't forget, our ultimate goal is to obtain more land and population and continue to expand the scale of the gods' punishment army. Obviously, the fourth prince of Grey Castle will hinder us even more. But just as Taifun was about to refute, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside the ring-shaped hall. The two were slightly startled, and simultaneously looked towards the door. They saw the door being pushed open with a bang, and a priest rushed in a panic. Not good, Your Excellency, not good. Calm down, Maine shouted. What's the matter? Say it slowly. Lady Heather's entourage has sent urgent information. A huge fleet has landed on the coast of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter, and a large group of enemies are besieging King City. The situation is precarious. The enemy ships are all uniformly hanging black sails, and the flag on the mast is a green flag with a sailboat crown. The priest looked very anxious. When the news was sent, the 2 city gates had already been lost, and Lady Heather is leading the believers to resist, but the enemy is numerous, and they have also used berserk pills. What? For a moment, Maine couldn't believe his ears. Black sails, sailboat crown pattern. Chapter 250. The granite steps of the Eternal Winter King City Temple were stained red with blood, and the sweet smell of blood in the air was somewhat pungent. There were many corpses lying on the ground. Some of them were from the gods' punishment army, some of the believers, some of their own people, and some of the Majin clan's San Nation. They died in different ways. Most of them had burn marks on their bodies, with broken limbs and internal organs scattered everywhere. Ryan knew that they had died from the impact and burning of the strong snow powder. Every time he stepped on a step, he would feel a kind of sticky feeling under his feet. The fighting will of the church's army of judges and believers could simply be described as crazy. Even in the face of the many strengthened slaves, they still didn't retreat, using their bodies as shields to entangle the enemy, just to give their companions the opportunity to stab a fatal blow. Although the pill could make people full of strength and make them fearless of pain, but the heart, neck, and head were still vital points. Her Majesty the Queen didn't have extra armor to arm these cheap slaves. If it weren't for the snow powder, the outcome of the battle might really be hard to say. But we won. Ryan's heart was burning hot. We won in the end. The flag of the Queen of Clearwater was fluttering at the top of the city wall. Even the church's most fortified stronghold couldn't withstand this wave of attack. In this way, the Black Sail Fleet got rid of the deadlock of being besieged in a corner of Grey Castle, and didn't need to exhaust their vitality in the endless war of attrition with Timothy. The hall of the temple was also in a mess. The ground was full of broken glass fragments and flowing blood, but he didn't care about it. He went straight to the center of the hall, in front of the woman in high spirits, and knelt down on one knee. Your Majesty, the 4 city gates have all fallen into the hands of the Black Sail Fleet. The kingdom of eternal winter is now yours. You've worked hard, get up. Garcia extended her hand in front of him. Ryan gently held the Queen's hand, symbolically kissed the back of her fingers, then got up and stood at her side. Strange etiquette, Kabbalah suddenly said from the side. You haven't even touched her hand. Why do you have to put on such an appearance? This question was so abrupt that he couldn't help but frown, but the other party was the patriarch of the Sandstone clan, so he couldn't reprimand her in public for her rudeness, so he coldly said, "This is a common etiquette between nobles. It represents politeness and respect. It would be rude to touch it. As a Sand nation, it is normal for you to not understand." Really? She raised her eyebrows and pointed to her neck. We're clearly allies who fought together, but we just ended the battle and you want to put this on me? The courtesy and respect of the mainlanders is really puzzling. Around Kabbalah's neck was a ring of iron bars, with a bulge in the middle. At first glance, it looked like a decoration, but Ryan knew that there was a god's stone of retaliation wrapped inside. Apart from a special key, it was difficult to unlock the iron bars with any other means, and the key was in Garcia's hands. The other party was a witch, so he naturally had to treat her with caution. However, she did contribute a lot in the battle. If it wasn't for her command, those slaves with strong snow powder wouldn't have dared to rush into the tight defensive line formed by the believers. He opened his mouth but did not know how to refute. "Come on, don't argue over such a trivial matter," Garcia interrupted. "Don't forget why we're here. Compared to the vast land of survival, can't you even bear a stone?" "I'm just saying." Kabbalah shrugged. "I hope you'll keep your promise. Of course, this is the basis of our cooperation." The Queen smiled. "What should we do next with Black Sail?" Ryan asked. "We'll talk about the next step of the plan later, but for now, let's watch a good show." Garcia clapped her hands and ordered the guards, "Bring her in." Soon, 2 armored guards walked into the temple with a woman whose hands were tied behind her back. She looked to be about 30 years old, with an ordinary appearance. Her brown hair was scattered messily on both sides of her cheeks, and she was wearing a golden church robe. This kind of exquisite workmanship and exquisite material was usually only worn by the Bishop of Hermes. At this moment, the gorgeous robe was torn in several places, and the edges were stained with blood. "This person is a bishop?" "Yes." The Queen of Clearwater curled up the corner of her mouth. "I've already asked the local nobles to confirm. She is one of the 3 archbishops of the church, Lady Heather." She looked at the other side. "What do you think, am I right?" Heather didn't answer, but Ryan could see from her eyes a strong sense of ridicule and disdain. Apparently, Garcia also felt this. She chuckled twice. "I also thought that you wouldn't surrender, so with a merciful idea, I brought you to the temple, and here I will send you back to the kingdom of God. You can slowly beg for God's salvation, or you can beg me for forgiveness. I will slowly cut off your fingers, limbs, and facial features, so that you can fully experience the pain and helplessness of the people of the Port of Clearwater." "And then?" The female bishop unexpectedly asked, "Will I be crushed into powder by the church's army? Or do you plan to drift on the sea for the rest of your life, never to reach the shore?" "You don't have to worry about this," Garcia signaled the guards to start. In contrast, the church's army is now attacking the Wolfshard city, and Hermes is like an undefended city, which is much more important than my fate. I may not be able to set foot on the land of the new holy city, but I can still raise the old holy city under the plateau to ruins. You should have heard that the Styx River in the extreme south of Grey Castle is extremely easy to ignite, and is very difficult to extinguish. This time I brought a whole boat with me. The guard pulled out a dagger, approached the bishop who was pressed to the ground, and neatly cut off 2 of her fingers. Heather clenched her teeth, not letting out a cry of pain. The Queen of Clearwater stepped onto the main stairs of the hall, sat on the spacious throne, supported her chin with her right hand, and revealed an expression of great interest. Another 3 fingers were cut off. This time the other party's left hand had become a bare palm. Heather's forehead was covered with beads of sweat. Do you have to do this? Kabbalah shook her head. If it wasn't to deter the enemy or to torture for information, this kind of pure torture is unnecessary. Unnecessary? Garcia laughed. You should say this to her. Do you know how the witches who fall into the hands of the church are treated? I guess you won't be interested to know. Ha ha. At this moment Heather, who had lost all 10 fingers, suddenly laughed. You simply don't understand the greatness of the church, and you also don't understand how important everything the holy city has done. You are always accompanied by ignorance, but you are completely ignorant of the impending destruction. Hermes will let you see what is called real power. Those who go against the church, except for destruction, there is no second ending. Is that so? Garcia crossed her legs, smiled and said, Then I'll wait and see. Until the archbishop died, she still didn't cry out a single word for mercy. But to Ryan's surprise, she also didn't call out the name of God, hoping for his salvation. Finally, due to excessive blood loss, when Heather was about to lose consciousness, her expression was terrifyingly cold. It didn't look like she was being tortured, but rather like she was watching a farce that had nothing to do with her. Through those eyes, Ryan seemed to see his own destined future. This kind of feeling made him feel inexplicably depressed, almost making him unable to breathe. Cut off her head and hang it at the entrance of the church. After confirming the bishop's death, Garcia ordered. Then she looked at Ryan. Now we can talk about the next step of the plan. Yes, Your Majesty. He forced down the discomfort in his heart. Are you going to attack Hermes? That's right, but not the whole army. She spread out a leather map that she always carried with her. The Black Sail Fleet will only leave a small number of sailors and some of the eastern slaves. They will operate the fleet along the river westward, heading towards the old holy city. But we will directly go south, crossing the border of the Kingdom of Endless Winter. Our destination is the Wolfshart City. Wolfshart? Ryan was startled. I have reached an agreement with the Wolf King Wolf, Garcia said bluntly. If I can help him thwart the church's attack, he will assist me in occupying the whole territory of the Kingdom of Endless Winter. In this way, if the church does not withdraw their troops, the strong snow powder and water from the Styx River on the ships will be enough to turn the old holy city into a sea of fire. But the new holy city is different. It is a city without walls. If we don't gather enough manpower, we will simply be unable to stop the attacks of the slaves from all directions. If they retreat, the Wolfshart City will be able to get some breathing space. Moreover, the 2 countries are bordering each other, so in the future we can join hands to fight against the church. Chapter 251. Seeing that the midsummer day was coming to an end, Border Town was about to usher in the last month of summer, which was also the hottest month. Roland increasingly didn't want to leave the castle. The saltpeter he had bought from Marjorie, in addition to making gunpowder, was used to lower the room temperature. Now, in almost every room, there was a bucket filled with saltpeter, and inside the bucket there was a kettle soaking. In this way, not only could he absorb the heat and cool down, but he could also drink ice water to quench his thirst. Only in this way he wouldn't have to sit in the office every day, sweating profusely. In addition to Anna, the rest of the witches were also suspended from their work. In addition to the daily practice and study, they basically gathered in the hall on the first floor. They were either chatting or playing Gwent with each other. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. As for Anna, it wasn't that Roland didn't want her to rest, but she simply wasn't afraid of the heat. She could even directly hold the red-hot iron ingot in her hands. The high temperature of the scorching summer was nothing to her. Even if she were to stand by the steel-making furnace for the whole afternoon, she wouldn't shed a drop of sweat. In order to reward the diligent and serious Anna, Roland had recently specially made some frozen desserts to reward her. For example, the classic delicious ice cream of later generations was made by mixing egg yolk, cream, milk and sugar water and stirring them evenly, then cooling them with saltpeter. Anna was very fond of this cold, soft and fragrant snack. Every time she took a small bite of the ice cream, the way her lake blue eyes curved into a line made him feel very pleasing to the eye. In addition, looking through the monthly summary tables sent by the City Hall was also a great pleasure for his mood. So far, the population of Border Town had doubled once again, and it was already close to 18,000 people. In addition, Longsong Stronghold would turn in a batch of serfs every month, so it wouldn't be a problem to break through the 20,000 mark next year. Not counting the number of villages and towns within the territory, this scale was almost comparable to that of Redwater City, Valencia and King City. What was slightly regrettable was that the population had increased quite a bit, but the quality of the population had not improved much. Currently, it was still the town's 1,000 or so natives who were receiving education, and it was very likely that it would take about a year for them to successfully graduate. Although the private academy that Carr previously opened had produced a batch of talents who graduated ahead of time, the number of less than 100 was still insignificant compared to the total population. Maybe I should start educating the refugees in the eastern region first, instead of waiting for enough dormitories to be built. Roland thought to himself. After all, there were only advantages to early education. The development of the town's factories was also very good. After more than half a year of construction, the industrial park now had 3 factories in operation, 2 steam engine production plants and 1 bullet processing plant. The number of workers in the number 1 factory had expanded from a dozen blacksmiths when it was first established to more than 100 now. Those who joined later were basically natives, which was exactly what he wanted to see. A batch of apprentices would gradually grow into craftsmen, and then lead the next batch of apprentices. The workers in the number 2 factory belonged to the Crescent Moon Bay Caravan. In just 1 month, they had roughly mastered the use of each machine tool. Although the yield was relatively bad, compared to the blacksmiths in the number 1 factory, the performance of these craftsmen in the first month was obviously better. But before the expiration of the contract, the steam engines they produced were all owned by Roland. Now the 2 factories could produce about 8 to 10 steam engines every month, which was also the main income of Border Town. As for the bullet factory, after it was completed, it was directly handed over to the First Army. Not only was there a sentry post at the entrance, but there were also patrols arranged around it. Even the production work was handled by the soldiers. After a week of trial operation, the new generation of fixed bullets had begun to be mass-produced. The assembly line designed by Roland couldn't achieve full mechanical production. Whether it was the primer, gunpowder, or warheads, they all needed to be filled and compacted by manpower. The main processing tools were 2 mechanical stamping machines. One was used to press the copper cut by Anna into the shape of a cartridge case, and the other was used to press the primer cup. The soldiers only needed to evenly place the mercury fulminate powder between 2 thin pieces of paper, stick the paper tightly, clamp it into the primer cup, and finally insert the primer cup into the annular groove at the end of the cartridge case. As for the process of loading the black powder and compacting the warhead, it was exactly the same as the previous reloading exercise. There weren't many people in the factory, only 40, but almost every day they could produce more than 500 rounds of bullets. Roland intended to turn these 40 people into full-time processing staff in order to maintain the normal operation of the bullet factory. Next, Roland planned to make up for the soap factory and the perfume factory. The former was an extremely important part of the military industry, and the latter might be able to open up a new trade channel for the town. As for the bicycle factory, it could be delayed as long as it could be put into production before the kingdom main street was repaired. Your Royal Highness, Nightingale pushed open the door. Maggie and Lightning have arrived. The 2 walked past Nightingale, ran to the table and poked their heads out. Is there something you need from us? Tomorrow is the summer season. Roland took out the long written reply from the drawer and handed it to Maggie. When you return to the fjords, remember to pass this to Tilly for me. She was stunned for a moment, blinked a few times, then took the envelope and carefully stuffed it into her close-fitting bag. No problem, Koo. Seeing the look of realization on the other party's face, Roland knew that he probably didn't remember that he had to go back every month to report the news. It seemed that the town was really charming. I forgot that tomorrow is a new month. Lightning pressed her forehead. Doesn't that mean we won't be able to see each other for a long time? Last time I was delayed because of Lady Tilly's cleaning plan. This time I will come back as soon as possible. Maggie shook her long white hair that was almost dragging on the ground. That eagle's nest has to wait for me to come back before I can explore it. Coo. I know, the little girl curled her lips. It's a deal. You also have a task. Roland spread out a map of the southern area of the town. This is the map you drew yourself. Do you still remember the location of the shoal near the mountain ridge? I remember. Lightning gestured on the map. It's probably in this place. Very well. Later you will take Maggie to fly once, and then at the intersection of the shoal and the mountain ridge plant 2 flags and mark it on the map. After he finished explaining, he looked at Maggie. If Tilly agrees to send witches, you can lead the sailboat to this shoal. I will meet you at the top of the mountain. Send witches? Lightning asked curiously, is there a new sister coming to Border Town? Chapter 252. The day after Maggie's departure, Roland took the witches to the courtyard and began to assemble the new generation of hot air balloons. Since the back garden and the witch dormitory were being expanded, Leaf had already moved the plants to the front yard. All kinds of vines covered the walls, wooden shelves and corridors, giving the impression of a prehistoric forest. The effect of shading the sun was also very obvious. The sun could only pass through the gaps between the dense green leaves, leaving scattered spots of light on the ground. Roland gave the witches a stack of white paper, letting them spread it out into a huge sheet of paper, and then let Soroya paint the lightest blue sky coating. Compared to the combination of bovine mesentery and canvas used in the first generation of hot air balloons, the pure coating was much lighter and had excellent toughness. There were no sutures at the joints, so there was no fear of the balloon disintegrating in the air. I heard from Lightning that there might be witches coming from the fjords? Vendi asked curiously. If everything goes well, Roland repeated the contents of the 5th princess's reply. The specific situation will have to wait for Tilly Wimbledon's reply. It seems that Ashes succeeded, she said thoughtfully. There are unexpectedly so many witches gathered on Sleeping Island. Yes, I'm afraid that Tilly has been planning this migration for more than 1 or 2 years, Roland said. Not only in Grey Castle, but also in the other 3 kingdoms she has sent witches to secretly contact. The Witch Cooperation Association should have also received her invitation. I guess this is why the guards have been spreading rumors for such a long time, but no witches have come to the door. After all, they are 1 step slower than Tilly. But Kara has never mentioned this to us. Vendi rubbed her shoulders. If she had told you about Tilly's invitation, maybe you wouldn't have insisted on looking for the Holy Mountain, right? There is indeed such a possibility, but in that case, we wouldn't have met in Border Town. She smiled and shook her head. So, this is also not bad. I also think it's pretty good. Lightning raised her hand. Maybe it would be better to go to the fjords. Lily curled her lips. After all, there are only witches there, so you don't need to pay extra attention to your surroundings like in Border Town. It's much better than before, Anna said seriously. I didn't even dare to go out then. That's right, some people are just like that. Obviously, when Ashes invited me last time, she also flatly refused, but still put on an act. Mystery Moon muttered, and she still says she's not a traitor. Lily's eyes widened. Idiot. Traitor. The other witches couldn't help but laugh. I also think so. Roland suddenly felt a sense of accomplishment welling up in his heart. Even if he wasn't as smart and quick-witted as the 5th princess, and wasn't as strong and decisive as Timothy and Garcia, but at least he could give these witches a free and comfortable living environment, and also bring a better life for the people under his rule. This hot air balloon. I'm afraid it's several times bigger than the last one. Nightingale looked at the part that Soroya had already drawn. Are you going to use it to transport the witches? He nodded. Only in this way can we avoid the seaport city and directly enter the border from the southern end of border town. Moreover, in addition to sending and receiving new visitors, it can also be regarded as a new attempt. After the paper was coated on both sides, it became a sandwich cloth. Each piece was nearly 6 meters long and wide. If it was a conventional canvas or linen, it would have been very difficult to drag it with one hand, but for the light coating, it was almost the same weight as a stack of paper. By piecing together more than a dozen pieces of cloth, and then gluing the seams with the coating, a giant airbag of astonishing size was made. What Roland wanted to test was the adhesion ability of Soroya's coating. At the very least, when he first saw her new ability, the thick bark, half drawn on the table, was still fresh in his mind. The two were firmly glued together, and by pulling the bark upwards, he could even lift the whole square table. In the end, how tightly the coating and the base could adhere, whether it could support a huge airbag, and after inflating, maintain its firmness and airtightness, these were all things he wanted to know. At present, the hot air balloon still needed to rely on Anna to inflate, but the hydrogen balloon could be operated by anyone. Now that he had a DC motor, he could produce hydrogen by electrolyzing water, and it seemed that the famous Zeppelin airship wasn't far away from him. As long as he found a suitable lightweight skeleton material, this huge monster that could fly at a height of 2 to 3 kilometers would have almost no natural enemies, and the technical difficulty would be much lower than that of an airplane. Although the hit rate of dropping a bomb at an altitude of a kilometer was very touching, it wouldn't be able to stop the enemy from only being able to take a beating without being able to fight back. Every day, he would be able to wander around the enemy's territory, and perhaps any opponent would collapse. Just imagining it in the future, when he went on an expedition to the church's holy city, there would be 4 or 5 airships floating side by side in the air, bombs falling like raindrops, and there would be shallow water gunships bombarding the enemy's city gates and strongholds in the river. In addition, there would be infantrymen armed with flintlocks waiting in the rear, and the 3 armies of the sea, land, and air would cooperate in battle. Just imagining it made him a little excited. "Your Royal Highness, what are you giggling about?" Anna sighed, reaching out to cover the corner of his mouth that he couldn't help but grin. "He's probably fantasizing about the new witches." Lily rolled her eyes. "Well, men." When the bottom of the airbag was connected to a huge vine basket with hemp ropes, the new generation of hot air balloon was successfully completed. Its volume was nearly 4 times larger than the first generation, and the number of people it could accommodate was also expanded to 10. Above the basket, there was also a sunshade, which could avoid direct sunlight. Of course, there was a need to leave a hole in the sunshade, so that Anna could add heat to the balloon. Roland named the balloon Cloud Gazer, and after the completion of the heavy load test in the open space of the courtyard, the next day they officially started their first voyage. In addition to Anna, Vendi, and the other 3 witches, there was also the prince himself who participated in this test flight. The whole process of the voyage went very smoothly, and the witches were chattering non-stop in the air, sighing at the spectacular scenery they saw from the sky. Compared to the last time when they had to observe from a fixed point, this sightseeing tour that was constantly moving obviously aroused everyone's interest. Cloud Gazer, under the influence of Vendi's steady wind, advanced towards the south, and at noon they arrived at the mountainous area, crossed over the top of the mountain where the flag was raised, and finally hovered above the coastline. After flying in a circle near the shoal, the party returned to the castle with Cloud Gazer. Roland noticed that Vendi, who was responsible for controlling the direction, was beating her shoulder from time to time, looking very tired. Chapter 253. As the Lord of the Western region, Roland naturally didn't have to do it himself. He only needed to draw a rough shape on paper and then clearly explain it to the tailor. Although he hadn't personally touched a bra, but he had seen it in all kinds of commercials, TV programs and movies, so there were only a few styles. He chose the most common shoulder strap buckle style with 3 sets of copper hooks, which allowed him to choose the looseness within a certain range. This kind of thing needed to be worn close to the body in order to meet the requirements of a corset, so Roland also called the castle's maid to let the tailor measure the size. The maid had been cutting clothes for many years, so she was very experienced. After listening to His Royal Highness' explanation, she immediately understood the role of a bra, and according to the actual measurement results, divided the bra size into several grades, and then subdivided the adjustment range. In fact, in this era, the prototype of the bra had already appeared, which was the corset. But it wasn't to make women more comfortable, but to tighten the waist as much as possible and prop up the chest so that the figure appeared to be hourglass-shaped. Those gorgeous aristocratic dresses were also designed according to the slender waist. Without the assistance of the corset, it would be very difficult for the average woman to wear this kind of extremely thin waistline dress. Too much pressure on the waist would bring an extremely uncomfortable experience, and in severe cases, it would even affect blood circulation and lead to fainting. In addition to supporting the chest, the bra could also play a fixed role and reduce the role of tremors, so wearing it on a daily basis would only make women more relaxed. In only 2 days, the old tailor had cut out 20 bras, using the silk and cotton materials provided by Roland, which were both beautiful and breathable, and the workmanship was exceptionally fine. But before Roland could deliver this gift to the witches, the caravan from King's City arrived in Border Town. Compared to the previous month, this time the caravan was not only late, but also far smaller than the last time. When the sailboats docked at the expanded pier of Border Town, there was even a sense of sparseness. "Your Royal Highness, we meet again," Marjorie said with a smile. "Welcome, you've worked hard to transport the fugitives." Roland looked at the caravan by the river. "This time there seems to be a lot less sailboats?" "Because of some unexpected reasons." She wiped the sweat from her forehead. "If you don't mind, let's go to the drawing room to talk. It's too hot here." "I think so too," muttered Hogg. "I'm a Grey Castle man through and through, and this weather is killing me. If it wasn't for the first steam engine, I wouldn't even want to leave home." Roland nodded and led the group back to the castle. Walking into the hall, Hogg immediately felt a chill on his face. He let out a long sigh. "Thank the gods for letting us discover such a beautiful thing. If I hadn't seen the production process of Ice Ray with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that it was produced from feces. Oh, and ice water. Your Highness, may I?" "Of course." Roland gestured for her to begin and returned to his seat. He then asked the female merchant, "So, what accident caused the sharp decrease in this month's shipments of saltpeter?" According to the contract, she was supposed to provide at least 3 ships of saltpeter to Border Town every month, but this time, there was only 1 ship carrying saltpeter. Because of King's City's Alchemist Association, they have recently been purchasing saltpeter. The price isn't high, but they have the support of the former Prime Minister, Marquis Wyke, so this isn't a pure transaction. The merchants have no choice but to sell. Marjorie spread her hands and said, "I guess this might be Timothy's idea. After all, he and the Prime Minister are practically breathing out of the same nostrils." "Timothy?" Roland asked, puzzled. "Didn't he go to the Southern Territory?" "Indeed," she nodded. "It seems that Theo has already told you the news. I heard that before he left King's City, he also took a lot of people and supplies with him. In all likelihood, he went to find trouble with Garcia. Not long after he left, the Alchemist Association began to purchase saltpeter." Roland knew more about this matter. Arranging Theo to work in King's City was indeed effective. At first, he only received the news that Timothy was summoning the underground rats. In order to prevent the other side from suddenly attacking, he also specifically asked Perrault to strengthen the defense of Long Song Stronghold. However, the next secret letter from his personal guard made Roland feel a little relieved. Timothy had gone straight to the Southern Territory. Obviously, this recruitment wasn't aimed at him. Regarding the use of this group of rats, Roland and his personal guard had the same opinion. That was, they weren't suitable for frontal combat, and their discipline was even worse than that of civilians and serfs. Therefore, Timothy's method of using this group of people was inevitably the same as last time. First, he would use drugs to make them addicted, and then force them to go forward and kill the enemy. This tactic of repeatedly using cannon fodder to deplete the opponent's strength was actually a safe strategy for the new king, who owned 2/3 of Grey Castle's territory. But why did the Alchemist Association suddenly want to purchase a large amount of saltpeter? Snow powder was originally one of their key products, but the wrong ratio had led to it being only used in the ceremonial barrel. Now, had they discovered the correct formula for gunpowder and were planning to mass produce it? Or were they trying to determine the best ratio through a large number of experiments? Roland shook his head and put aside the doubts that emerged in his mind. It was meaningless to speculate about these things. As soon as possible, he had to complete the industrial production of 3 acids and 2 alkalis, and then switch to more advanced chemical gunpowder. So, next month's supply of saltpeter can't be guaranteed for 3 ships? I don't know. Although Marjorie looked a little embarrassed, she still bluntly said, I spent a lot of effort to transport this ship to the Western Territory, buying it from Silver City. Now is the hottest time of summer, and the demand for saltpeter is very high, so I'm not sure how much I can buy. If it was any other season, I could guarantee a supply for 3 ships. I understand. Roland drank a mouthful of ice water. Then next month, try your best. If you can't, don't force yourself. I have new goods that I need to purchase from you. Margaret heaved a sigh of relief. What is it? Is it still or? The washing stone used to wash clothes, he replied. It looks like a white cloudy crystal or a stone pillar. When soaked in water, it will give off a greasy feeling. This kind of thing is not uncommon in the King City hotels. Sure enough, it's ore again, the female merchant smiled helplessly. Obviously, your territory has a large mine, but the goods you purchase are all minerals. It's really hard to understand. Well, this thing is indeed quite a lot, and the price is not expensive. What do you plan to do with it? Naturally, it's to make it more convenient to wash clothes, Roland smiled. The washing stone was something he found from the 4th prince's memory. Its essence was a kind of natural alkali, mainly composed of sodium bicarbonate. It had a strong decontamination effect. Together with plant ash and pancreas, it was known as one of the 3 ancient cleaning tools. In the absence of an ion exchange membrane, the efficiency of collecting sodium hydroxide by electrolysis of salt water was extremely low, and salt was also not cheap. So he planned to directly purchase natural alkali to make caustic soda. With enough caustic soda, it would be possible to mass-produce soap, and soap's byproduct, glycerin. Chapter 254. Your Royal Highness, I wanted to ask you when I came through the door. Hogg showed an expression as if he had finally caught his breath. The kettle of ice water in the wooden barrel had already been emptied by him. The painting in the hall? I'm afraid it's not something an ordinary person can draw, right? Whether it's the degree of realism or the perspective of looking down from the sky. He paused, then lowered his voice and asked, Is this the work of a witch? Roland looked at Marjorie. The latter nodded. Your Royal Highness, please rest assured, Hogg is an old friend I have known for many years. He also has no malicious intent towards witches. You guessed right, it was indeed drawn by a witch. 2 days ago, Roland had ridden a hot air balloon to sightsee near the beach, so he wanted to preserve this magnificent scene of beauty. Moreover, the castle's living room was simply decorated. There wasn't even a single painting, so he simply let Soroya turn the stone wall behind the main seat into a huge mural. With the artistic background wall, the style of the hall instantly rose by several levels. I knew it, Hogg sighed, although they are advertised as the devil's minions, but those strange abilities are really enviable. Ordinary people can't fly in the air like them, and then draw such a beautiful and peerless mural. You only got the first half of the sentence right. Roland shook his head. Even if ordinary people don't rely on magic, they can still fly. They can even fly higher than eagles, and fly faster than swallows. You're really humorous, Hogg laughed. Only if we have an extra pair of wings, and become lighter than birds. Marjorie was startled. Really? Of course, the prince said with a smile. I can prove it to you. Letting the merchants see their various inventions was also an effective way to improve relations and expand trade routes, from the mugs to the liquor. As for whether they could sell it or not, that was another matter. In any case, the caravan would stay in border town for a few days, so the regular business negotiation process should be about eating, drinking, and having fun, and finally signing. Moreover, Anna was also very interested in traveling by hot air balloon. It just so happened that she could take a break from her busy work and rest for a while. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. Cloud Gazer quickly finished inflating, and for this voyage, Roland simply called the witches who hadn't been able to ride the hot air balloon last time. Lucia also timidly asked if she could take her younger sister to take a look, and he readily agreed. When the balloon slowly rose with everyone, Marjorie covered her mouth in surprise, while Hogg tightly grasped the edge of the basket, not knowing whether he was excited or afraid. Belle was too short to see the scenery outside the basket, so Lucia had to pick her up and put her on her shoulder. She carefully approached the basket and told her not to move. As the navigator and rescuer, Lightning kept circling around the hot air balloon, making faces at Belle from time to time. Just like that, the hot air balloon once again circled the southern coastline, completing its aerial sightseeing tour. After returning to the castle, Hogg's legs were still trembling and he stammered, "I never thought that looking down from the sky would actually be so frightening. I felt as if I could fall at any time." "You'll get better after flying a few more times," Roland said with a smile. "The people whose feet leave the ground for the first time will have this kind of illusion, just like people who have never gone to sea will also vomit on a bumpy ship." "You're right," Marjorie exclaimed in admiration. "The scenery we saw today was really incredible. Looking at the edge of the sea from the sky, it unexpectedly looked like a blue arc. However, Your Highness, it seems that what I said wasn't wrong." Hogg drank a mouthful of iced white wine. "Ordinary people can indeed fly to the sky, but this is still the credit of the witches. If it weren't for them, this big guy wouldn't have been able to fly." "No, my old friend." Roland hadn't even opened his mouth when Marjorie rushed to speak first. "Don't tell me you haven't noticed? Miss Anna is only releasing flames, that's all. I also specifically asked Lightning. She told me that as long as the airbag is filled with hot air, the Cloud Gazer can rise to the sky by itself. Flames aren't the privilege of witches, Your Highness, am I right?" She was indeed worthy of being a fjord sea merchant who had established a foothold in King's City. Whether it was her observation or her ability to think, she was exceptionally outstanding. Roland smiled and nodded. "The hot air rises and the cold air sinks. This is also the reason why it's called a hot air balloon." "You really only need to light a brazier to do it?" Hogg asked doubtfully. "That won't do, because if you want it to float in the air, you must continue to heat it up, and the wood itself is very heavy. We can't carry too much, so we must use a special method to solve this problem. Can you do it?" Marjorie couldn't wait to ask. "Well, it should be possible," Roland thought for a moment. "It's just a bit troublesome." "That's great," she immediately said. "I hope to buy 4 or 5 hot air balloons from you. They don't need to be too big, just enough to carry one person." "Do you want to use them on the ship?" Hogg asked. "Well, the mast can't be extended indefinitely, but the hot air balloon can, as long as we tie a rope under the basket, so that it doesn't float away with the wind. With the hot air balloon, the lookout can find nearby pirate ships earlier. For sea merchants, in addition to unpredictable storms and tsunamis, the biggest threat is a group of pirates." "But I'm afraid the cost of it won't be too low," Roland estimated in his heart. "I estimate that it will cost more than 1,000 golden dragon." If he didn't use the witch's heating, the hot air balloon would have to use gas as fuel, and the easiest to obtain would undoubtedly be gas. Unfortunately, Greycastle's coal mine was located in the Coldwind Ridge area, which was too far from border town, and according to the current traffic conditions, it was almost impossible to transport it. Replacing it with a hydrogen balloon would be easier to achieve, but at the same time, he would need to solve the problem of the gas storage tank. If he couldn't freely charge and release it, then it wouldn't have any practical value. "How about 1,000 golden dragons for each balloon?" Marjorie haggled. "If you really make such a thing, I can guarantee that all the caravans that travel to and from the fjords will want to buy 1 or 2. This time, the Crescent Moon Bay caravan didn't come, otherwise they would definitely place a large order." Hogg drank the white wine in his hand in one gulp. "I don't need it. Although the hot air balloon looks very magical, it has no use for the mines of Silver City. I only hope to get my steam engine as soon as possible." The price the other party offered made Roland overjoyed. 1,000 golden dragons was the price he had estimated after increasing the price by 5 times. He didn't expect that the other party would actually be willing to accept a price that was twice the price of the steam engine. However, when he thought about it carefully, the goods carried by a ship were likely to be worth more than this price, not to mention the entire merchant fleet and the sailors on board. As long as they could avoid the plundering of the pirates, this deal was still a good deal for the sea merchants. In addition, 1,000 golden dragons wasn't a one-time deal. Whether it was hydrogen or gas, they were all consumables, and when they were used up they had to be brought back to border town to inflate, which was another extra income. Of course, if they bought a large number of gas tanks at once, they could consider giving them a discount or giving them a number of times to inflate. In this regard, the 4S shop and the 2 barrels of oil were examples he could learn and imitate. Chapter 255. The weather in the fjords was very strange. Yesterday it had been a cloudless blue sky, but today it was gloomy, with strong winds and thunder. It seemed that a rainstorm was coming. Ashes pressed down her hair, which had been blown loose, and walked into Tilly's residence. The first thing she saw was the giant pigeon sitting on her shoulder. "Maggie!" The pigeon raised its head and its eyes lit up. It spread its wings and flew straight to the door. Ashes reached out and easily stopped it. "Turn into a human and talk." "Woo, coo." Maggie fluttered to the ground, shed her feathers, and revealed her original appearance. She curled her lips and said, "Do you hate pigeons?" "I always think it strange that a big bird can speak." Ashes smiled and pulled up the girl who was sitting on the ground. "When did you come back?" "Not long ago. I was afraid that I would encounter a storm, and my wings were about to break." She patted her chest. "Fortunately, I flew to Sleeping Island before the rain fell." "You flew back like this?" Ashes put her hand on her forehead. "Why didn't you turn into a petrel? Wouldn't it be much faster?" "Oh." Maggie suddenly realized and blinked. "I forgot to." Tilly could not help but laugh out loud. She put down the letter in her hand and said, "Thank you for your hard work. I've already heard the news from the other side. Go and play with Lotus and Molly. I'll let you know when I've thought of a reply." Maggie bowed and bounced out. What did Roland Wimbledon say? When there were only 2 people in the room, Ashes walked to Tilly and sat down on the ground. There was a map spread in front of her. After looking at it carefully, it seemed to be a topographic map of the vicinity of Border Town. "This is his letter." Tilly handed her a piece of paper. "I have to say, the witches he chose are really special." Ashes quickly read the letter and could not help but frown. He actually chose Sylvie? Does he not care about being exposed at all? "I don't know," Tilly said noncommittally. "Maybe my ability notes were too vague, so he didn't look into it at all? Or does he not mind revealing his identity in front of us to show his sincerity in cooperating with us? Of course, there's another possibility. He really is your brother," Ashes continued, "so he doesn't care about Sylvie's ability at all. But the possibility is very small." She laughed at herself. "Who knows better than me what kind of person my brother is? If it was really Roland Wimbledon, he would never choose to become the enemy of the church just to protect the witches. Ever since he was young, what he was best at was escaping, whether it was in the face of challenges or difficulties. Even when he was transferred to the borderlands by the order to fight for the throne, I have never seen him protest to his father, even symbolically." Ashes raised her eyebrows. "In short, it's a good thing for us that he took the initiative to choose Sylvie, so we don't have to find an excuse to send another witch out. But the other witches, are you really going to agree with him?" "Why not?" "Lotus is one of the most important witches on Sleeping Island. If she's not here, who will repair those mud houses? If we want to build something or transform the island's terrain, it will be very inconvenient without the ability to reshape the terrain. After all, we have only used less than 30% of the entire Sleeping Island, and there are still many places that can be transformed." She counted with her fingers. "Honey, too, can drive the osprey to catch fish for everyone. The delicious fish soup that everyone enjoys every day is all thanks to her. As for Candle and Evelyn, There are not many problems. Can't you refuse his request and send 2 witches who are not very useful? What is useful and what is not? I sent them to Border Town in the hope of forming an alliance with the other side, not abandoning them. Tilly looked a little serious. No matter what their abilities are, the sisters who choose to come to this island are all witches. If we want to build Sleeping Island into a home for witches, how can we select them according to how useful their abilities are? Ashes had seen her show such an expression in the palace. This was the expression of the 5th princess when she was really angry. She couldn't help but change the way she addressed her. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, I'm just," Tilly sighed and slowly said, "Besides, it's difficult to measure everyone's abilities by a certain standard. Roland chose these 5 witches from more than 100, including Candle and Evelyn, who you said were not very useful. Are they really useless? Perhaps through this contact, we can figure out whether his purpose in choosing these 2 witches was accidental, or he saw something we didn't realize." She paused. "In any case, we are a very small part of the population. Any witch is worth fighting for. They are not tools for building a home, but partners with a common goal. In the future, don't say such things." "Yes, Your Highness." Ashes bowed her head. At this moment, a lightning pierced through the clouds and fell straight on the sea. As if it was a command from God, a deafening thunder followed, exploding above Sleeping Island. Rain fell from the sky. At first, it was a sparse dripping sound, but soon it became a continuous noise. The dense rain curtain made the scenery outside the window covered with a layer of white mist. The rain was so heavy that it even covered the sound of the conversation between the 2. Ashes got up and closed the window to prevent the rain from drifting into the room. Looking back, she saw Tilly swaying twice, looking a little haggard. "Did you stay up late again last night?" "Well," Tilly yawned. "The books I brought back from the ruins are all written in the same language, and I've already found a common point among them. As long as I have enough time, I'll definitely be able to translate them all." "Yes, in time, we have already gotten rid of the church's entanglement, so we have plenty of time. You don't need to study it all night long." Ashes frowned. "It will have a great impact on your body. Don't worry, I am an extraordinary witch, my body won't collapse so easily." Princess Tilly took a deep breath. "Moreover, I have a faint premonition. The scene I saw in the ruins made me feel uneasy. It is better to decipher the contents of these books as soon as possible. By the way, when the witches go to Border Town, let them also bring an ancient book. If even you can't understand it, then the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association will be even more impossible." "I'm just trying my luck," Tilly said. "I heard that there are also ancient ruins in the Eastern Forest, and the origin of the Witch Cooperation Association is in Seawinshire, which is almost next to the forest. Maybe one of them has seen this kind of writing. If we can prove that the 2 languages are the same, it means that these ruins are all written by the same people." "Yes, I know," Ashes replied. "In addition, I am not blaming you before. What you said is also reasonable, but it is not about the role of the ability." She stretched out her hand to stop Ashes from speaking. "I have reached an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce of Crescent Moon Bay. They will separate a part of the ordinary people to migrate to Sleeping Island next spring. If Lotus leaves for too long, it will indeed affect the follow-up construction of the island. So before the arrival of winter, I will let them return to the fjords." Ashes breathed a sigh of relief. "That's good. But in order to avoid misunderstandings, I will also lead a few combat witches to replace them in going to Border Town to help the Witch Cooperation Association resist the months of demons." Tilly revealed a sly smile. "When the time comes, are you willing to go with me?" Chapter 256. The storm came and went quickly. The group set off on the 2nd day after the rain stopped, and the ship responsible for sending them to Grey Castle was the Charming Beauty. Sylvie leaned against the railing of the ship, took out a piece of beef jerky from the cloth bag, raised it above her head and shook it. Oh, a huge seagull fell from the sky accompanied by a cry. The airflow caused by its wings made her squint, and the jerky in her hand was taken away. When she raised her head, the seagull had returned to the front of the sailboat, continuing to lead the way in the vast sea. This was what Maggie had asked her to do, because when she turned into a bird, she couldn't take out her own jerky to eat. Although at this time her appearance was no different from an ordinary seagull, except for the body shape, but Sylvie could see the magic surging within the other's body and its true form. If she looked closely, she could also see the magic gathering from all directions, turning into spots of light and disappearing. I heard that she can not only transform into different birds, but also obtain the corresponding ability? Someone behind her said in amazement, "As far as I know, a seagull will never get lost in the sea, and can even sense the arrival of a storm in advance." Indeed, Mr. Captain, even without looking back, Sylvie could clearly know who it was. Otherwise, we wouldn't dare to rashly choose a new route, bypassing the endless cape and landing southwest of Grey Castle. Her ability not only allowed her to observe the flow and changes of magic, but also gave her a wide field of vision without any blind spots. She could observe the movements around her at any time, and obstacles couldn't obstruct the extension of her line of sight. She could even see the lazy sailors sleeping under the deck, and the shoals of fish swimming under the ship. "Is there also a port there?" Captain Jack spat out a mouthful of smoke. "I remember there were explorers who went to the west of the Endless Cape, but except for the cliffs and shoals, there was nothing there." "It's better if there's nothing there," Sylvie said indifferently, "so we can go back the way we came." "Isn't that equivalent to a wasted trip?" The captain shook his pipe. "I'm looking forward to seeing something different on this new route." This trip was entrusted by Lady Tilly to go to another gathering place of witches to contact and help each other. In addition to the 5 selected witches, Ashes and Molly were also on board, but they didn't go ashore, just to ensure that the voyage was safe. Molly's magic servant could help the ship resist storms, while Ashes could make it so that any pirates who set their eyes on the ship would never be able to return. She also had another responsibility, which was to identify Roland Wimbledon's true identity for Lady Tilly. Before departing, Tilly had explained the cause of the matter in detail to her, as well as the possible results and methods to deal with it. Simply put, it was to reach an agreement with the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association in exchange for Roland's real body. But to be honest, Sylvie always felt that this task would not be so easy to complete. If the Witch Cooperation Association did not agree, then it would be fine. But what if they didn't want the news to leak out and imprisoned her and the other 4 people? Looking through the cabin wall, seeing Lotus, Evelyn and the others happily playing with the magic servant, she couldn't help but sigh. I hope that the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association are really as warm and friendly as Maggie said. After sailing on the sea for nearly a week, Sylvie finally saw the gray coastline. "We're almost there," Honey shouted while leaning on the side of the ship. Beside her, a row of petrels, ospreys and seagulls also joined in the noise. "We're finally here." Candle was leaning on the side of the ship with a haggard face. "I don't think I can hold on any longer." "This is only a temporary phenomenon, child. As long as you go ashore, you will soon recover," Jack One Eye laughed while holding the telescope. "I've been sailing for so many years, but I've never seen anyone die on board because of the turbulence." "What about Maggie?" Honey asked. "She has already flown to Border Town ahead of time to contact the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association," Ashes answered her. "I believe that they will soon send someone to pick you up." "Sister Ashes, won't you come with us?" "Tilly needs my help," Ashes smiled. "Don't worry, the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association will treat you as sisters. If you have any difficulties, you can find Vendi. She will definitely help you solve it." Vendi, Sylvie silently remembered this name in her heart. "Yes, there is one more thing," Ashes patted her forehead. "You must remember to stay away from Lord Roland Wimbledon. You must not easily be alone with him." "Why? Isn't he Lady Tilly's brother?" Evelyn was puzzled. "He is," Ashes said seriously, "but this doesn't prevent him from touching the witch's buttocks." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. The sailboat finally docked about half a mile away from the shoal. After all, there were no detailed sea charts here, so no one knew how deep the water at the shoal was. The way to go ashore was very simple. They didn't even need to release the landing boats. Molly directly let the servants wrap the 5 people, and together with herself, they floated on the sea surface. This shoal was obviously a part of the mountain, and under the constant erosion of the sea, it had become a soft sandy beach. Not far away was the towering mountains, completely separating the inland of Grey Castle from the coast. The mountain range was endless, and the further west they went, the higher they became. At the end of their vision, it almost evolved into a huge mountain similar to the impassable mountain range. After waiting for almost an hour, Sylvie noticed a strange shadow approaching. Its size was very large, almost the same as the charming beauty, and its round outline obviously didn't seem to be a natural creation. It stood to reason that such a huge object should be extremely heavy, but its trajectory was quite smooth, as if it was floating in the air. Separated by the mountains and woods, she couldn't see it clearly, but this thing was indeed constantly climbing, and soon it would cross the mountains. After a while, it revealed its true appearance from behind the cover. "Oh my God, what is that?" Lotus looked at the sky in surprise and asked incredulously, "Sister Ashes, have you ever seen this thing?" Evelyn pulled her arm. "No." Ashes also looked a little surprised. "It's also the first time I've seen this thing." "It seems that this is the way the Witch Cooperation Association welcomes us," Sylvie said with emotion. They saw an amazing spherical object floating in the air, with a basket made of vines hanging below it. Maggie and another witch, one on the left and one on the right, accompanied the basket as it flew. The most striking thing was that at the bottom of the basket was a long yellow canvas, on which several huge words were written. Chapter 257. After the basket landed, a witch who looked to be in her 30s, with red hair hanging down to her waist, stepped out of the basket and greeted them. "Hello, welcome to Border Town, I'm Vendi." Then she looked at Ashes, revealing a happy smile. "You've also come." Is she the witch that Ashes had mentioned before? Sylvie thoughtfully looked at the two. It seemed that they had known each other for a long time. "Welcome, I'm Anna." The appearance of the other witch made Sylvie's eyes light up. Her pair of blue eyes were as pure as a lake, really eye-catching. But what made her even more concerned was that the other party's magic was huge, vigorous, and almost flawless. A black, white, and gray cube slowly rotated. Even the magic gathered from all around was distorted by it. How amazing is this power? It was the first time that Sylvie had seen such oppressive magic. "Hi, my name is Lightning." The one who had originally flown next to the basket was this little girl. Maggie also followed closely behind and landed on her shoulder. "Coo-coo." After Ashes had briefly introduced the witches of Sleeping Island, Vendi smiled and invited everyone to board the basket. "This huge air sac above our heads is called a hot air balloon. As long as we can provide it with hot air, it can take us over the mountains and directly to our destination." She paused for a moment, then asked Ashes, "Do you really not want to go to Border Town to take a look? I think His Highness will also want to see you again." "He will not welcome someone who intends to poach his witches," Ashes smiled. "I'll have to trouble you to take care of these children." "Is that so?" Vendi looked a little regretful, pursing her lips. "Rest assured, I will treat them well." "Then everyone should hurry up," Anna reminded. "Cloud Gazer is about to take off." Sylvie only felt a slight tremor under her feet. The basket had already left the ground. She poked her head out and saw Ashes and Molly waving at them. As the hot air balloon continued to rise, the scenery on the ground became smaller and smaller. Soon, the two of them turned into fingernail-sized specks. No matter what, a new life was about to begin. Vendi's ability seemed to be to control the wind. Under her control, the hot air balloon moved inland towards Grey Castle. It was Sylvie's first time looking down at the earth from the sky. Although the earth and rocks couldn't stop her from investigating, it was still a novel experience to have such a large field of vision in one go. She tried to summon the Eye of Magic, but she did not expect the chaotic scene to flood into her mind like a tide. The steep rock wall hidden in the depths of the sea, the underground river connected to the sea, the animal skeletons buried in the soil, and the changes in the underground rock stratum. These scenes suddenly gave Sylvie a splitting headache, and the magic power in her body rapidly decreased. She quickly interrupted the magic eyes and leaned against the side of the basket, gasping for breath. "Are you okay?" someone asked. She opened her eyes and found that the other person was Vendi. Well, I'm just a little dizzy. Taking a few deep breaths will make you feel better, Vendi said with a smile. Many people feel uncomfortable when they leave the earth for the first time. Thank you, I'm feeling better, Sylvie nodded. The atmosphere along the way was much more harmonious than she had initially expected. Just like Ashes had said, Vendi was full of concern for everyone, and would not treat them differently just because they were newcomers. Although Anna didn't speak much, as long as someone asked her a question, she would still answer seriously. Lightning seemed to be very close to Maggie, and her personality was also very lively. From time to time, she would fly into the basket with the fat pigeon and chat with everyone, completely not treating herself as a stranger. With Maggie acting as the link between the two sides, the other 4 people gradually relaxed, and one after another, they asked Lightning about the situation in Border Town. Later, the little girl simply hovered next to the basket and told everyone the story of the town's resistance against the demonic beasts and invaders, as well as His Royal Highness' incredible inventions, which made everyone stunned. It didn't take long before the hot air balloon arrived above the castle. Just by looking at its size, the town really deserved to be called a border town. It was both narrow and remote, and its size was less than a third of Sleeping Island's. However, there were a lot of townspeople, whether it was in the central square, the periphery of the city walls, or the riverbank. You could see groups of people everywhere. They ran back and forth, converging into a surging stream. The hot air balloon landed directly in the castle courtyard, and just as they stepped out of the basket, a burst of roars suddenly sounded. Caught off guard, Sylvie was startled, and for a moment she froze in place. The other 4 people weren't any better. Honey even went back into the basket, and with half of her head sticking out, she asked, "What happened?" Vendi couldn't help but laugh. "Don't worry, this is His Royal Highness playing a cannon salute to welcome your arrival." Passing through the shady corridors, they entered the castle hall, where Sylvie finally saw Tilly's brother. He was sitting on the main seat in the hall, and his appearance was somewhat similar to Her Royal Highness the 5th Princess, with the same gray hair, no extra pendants on his body, and a relaxed and natural expression on his face. Although his face was far less pleasing to the eye than Lady Tilly's, but he had a calm temperament, and just by sitting there he was able to attract everyone's attention. "Welcome to Border Town. I am the Lord of the Western Territory, Roland Wimbledon. Presumably you already know my name." He got up and said with a smile, "Tilly Wimbledon is my sister, so you don't need to feel restrained, just think of this town as Sleeping Island." Sylvie couldn't help but open her magic eyes, and then she couldn't help but be startled. The expected darkness didn't appear, the opposite party unexpectedly didn't wear a god's stone of retaliation, and there was also no trace of magic activity on his body. His original appearance, under the true sight, was still the same. It was neither a disguise, nor was he being controlled, which could only mean that the man in front of her was Roland himself. And in the countermeasures that Lady Tilly had given her, there was only one sentence for this kind of situation: send the news back to Sleeping Island. What Roland said next, she didn't listen at all. Her mind was a mess. In order to complete the task entrusted to her by Lady Tilly, she even thought of the words and expressions to use when negotiating, and even prepared to be imprisoned, but the result was that it didn't come in handy. Now, she just had to wait until the end of the month, and let Maggie bring the information back, and then the task would be completed. But how is this possible? A real noble, actually determined to shelter a witch? And also become the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association? The psychological gap made Sylvie a little absent-minded. Until His Royal Highness arranged a room for her to sleep in for the night, she came back to her senses. The situation is roughly like this. The witch house has not yet been completed, so you can only temporarily live in the castle, sharing a room with other witches. Of course, this will also make it easier for you to quickly integrate into the life of Border Town. Roland said, "Tonight there will be a sumptuous dinner waiting for you. As an official welcome to Border Town, enjoy it." The result of the room allocation made Sylvie feel relieved. She was finally arranged to live together with Vendi. From this short contact, Vendi was indeed a good senior, so it should be easier to get along with her. But in addition to her, there seemed to be a witch called Nightingale living in the room. Chapter 258. Since the arrival of the 5 sleeping island witches in Border Town, Roland had been in a state of excitement. After the banquet, he found himself lying in bed unable to fall asleep, so he got up and drank half a glass of white wine to force his body to fall asleep. The next day, when the summer cicadas in the courtyard began to make a ya sound, he had already regained consciousness. He climbed out of bed in high spirits, and after a simple wash, he walked into the office. At this time, the sky had just turned white, and the first ray of dawn was evenly sprinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows into the room. Roland looked around, but did not see the familiar figure of the past. Usually, when he opened the door, he would always see Nightingale lying on a chair with a lazy look. He could not help but smile, sat at the table, took out a notebook from the drawer, and began to plan the next witch's training plan. Helping the newcomers to familiarize themselves with the environment and integrate into the group would naturally be handled by Vendi, Scroll, and the others. What he needed to do was to launch a sugar-coated attack, so that the visiting witches could enjoy the unique comfort of this place. It was not necessary to make the other party stay in Border Town to be successful. Even if they went back, it would also be an excellent advertisement for his territory. When the sun completely rose, Nightingale finally appeared in the office. "Oh, you got up very early today. Is it really as Lily said, that you can't restrain yourself from the new witches?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" Roland smiled and put a bag of dried fish on the table. "How did you get along with the new sisters last night?" "Sisters?" She curled her lips. "Don't trust them too much." "What's wrong?" Nightingale reached out and hooked the bag, then turned around and sat back on the recliner. The witch named Sylvie, half of her 10 sentences were lies. Although it was not serious to the point of harboring evil intentions, she definitely had a lot of hidden intentions. "Well, it's understandable," Roland said carelessly. "She probably wanted to see if I was really Roland Wimbledon." "What?" Nightingale was slightly startled. If your relative's personality had changed drastically, you would definitely wonder if he had been replaced or controlled, right? He laughed and said, "I guess that's how Tilly sees me. In King City, I'm famous for idling around, being ignorant and incompetent, bullying the good and fearing the evil. How could I possibly stand up and protect a witch?" In fact, it was not an exaggeration to say that Prince Roland was a terrible person. In his childhood memory, Prince Roland accidentally broke a few crystal glass jars while playing in the palace. In order to avoid punishment, he not only pushed all the blame to Tilly Wimbledon, but also faked the scene and threw his 6- or 7-year-old sister into the glass shards. With such a dark history, it would be strange if others did not have a deep impression of him. It was normal for them to suspect that their elder brother, who had undergone a huge change in temperament, was no longer the same person. Anyone would want to investigate. "I want to know too," Nightingale asked curiously. "Are you really Roland Wimbledon?" "I am, and I'm not." Roland spread his hands. She suddenly froze. "Why does my ability tell me that this sentence is true?" "Because it's the truth." Nightingale's ability could only distinguish deliberate lies, but he didn't think that he was lying. She frowned and thought for a long time. Finally, she held her forehead and decided to give up thinking. "Forget it, I'll just ask Anna later. No matter what, as long as you're the Roland I'm familiar with, it's fine. Of course, from the moment I met you, I've always been me." Roland smiled. After breakfast, the 5 witches of Sleeping Island were brought to the office by Vendi. "Good morning, Your Highness." The 5 witches bowed their heads and saluted. "Relax, I'm not a person who pays much attention to etiquette. You can call me the same way you call Tilly." Roland waved his hand. "For the first week, I won't arrange any work for you. The main thing is to familiarize yourself with the town's environment and life. You can visit Border Town at will. No one will speak ill of you because you're witches, nor will they try to catch you in exchange for rewards. I've already eradicated the church's influence from the western region, so this place is the same as Sleeping Island, a land of freedom. I think you should all know the reason for the magic bite, so you can't neglect the necessary practice. There are no restrictions during the day, as long as you don't forget to come back for lunch. After dinner, there will be primary education classes, including literacy, reading and writing, as well as simple mathematics and natural knowledge. Tilly may have mentioned to you that witches can be further strengthened on the day of adulthood, so it's very necessary to master this knowledge. If you're interested, you can come and listen to the classes with the witches of Border Town. In addition, you'll get a golden dragon as a monthly reward, as well as weekends and paid leave. If you don't understand, you can ask Vendi. In short, your daily life is the same as that of the Witch Union. Sleeping Island is the home of witches, and Border Town is the same. Roland paused. Then let's test our abilities first. Tilly's description in the letter isn't very clear, so I want to see it with my own eyes. It's not convenient to do it here, so let's change to a more spacious place. Please wait a moment, Your Highness, I still have something to give you, Sylvie said. What is it? She opened the package in her hands and put a few yellowed parchments and a letter on the table. Lady Tilly found these documents in the ruins of the fjords. She wants to ask you everything in this letter. Roland opened the envelope in doubt. The letter wasn't long, so he quickly read to the end, but the content of the letter set off a monstrous wave in his heart. An artificial stone island sleeping at the bottom of the sea, the unpredictable ebb and flow of the tide, a telescope that could still be used after hundreds of years, and a stone gate built on top of a cliff. It's simply incredible. How could there be such incredible ruins in the fjords? Moreover, Tilly's question at the end of the letter also made him feel numb. After glancing at the parchment, he found that the words were indeed somewhat familiar. Quickly call Scroll, Roland ordered Nightingale. Scroll quickly rushed back from the city hall to the castle. When she summoned the Book of Magic, the prince couldn't help but frown. He saw that the holy book that Kara had brought out from the eastern forest ruins was actually written in the same language as the documents found in the fjord's ruins. Tilly's conjecture in the letter was confirmed. These ancient ruins were all created by the same group of people. If it was the church who built all of this, why did they abandon it all? And not only these magnificent buildings, but even the records of 450 years ago were completely erased. In the end, what were they trying to hide? Even the scorching summer sun couldn't make Roland feel a trace of warmth. He only felt a faint chill rising from the soles of his feet, gloomy and cold. Chapter 259. The letter also mentioned that Tilly was trying to translate these words, and wanted to see if the Witch Cooperation Association had any clues. Roland decided to reply to the other side with the news of the devil and the holy city of Tequila, and also sent Soroya's restored photos of the scene. Maybe it would be helpful for her translation. This kind of information was not suitable to be hidden. The earlier they could understand the changes of more than 400 years ago, the earlier they could make preparations, and maybe they could also find the church's weakness. If they had no scruples, there was no need to bury all the past history in the ground. Obviously, there were some things they wanted to avoid being known. In addition, it was best to send someone to check the stone tower in the concealing forest. The ruins of the eastern sea wind region were blocked by the church, and the fjord's stone island was immersed in the sea all year round. Except for a pile of books in the secret room, there was almost nothing left. The depths of the concealing forest were inaccessible. Even the church couldn't easily reach there. Maybe they could find some useful clues. However, the Devil in Lightning's report also made him very afraid. This kind of action could not be done without witches, but if there was a loss of witches, any one of them would be hard for Roland to accept. After thinking it over, he decided to wait until the army was equipped with a new generation of firearms, and then directly go to the forest with the witches to deal with the possible appearance of the devil. Roland suppressed the uneasiness in his heart, revealing a reluctant smile. I understand Tilly's matter. I will write back and explain to her. The next step is to complete the ability test. After all, taking advantage of peaceful times to develop and strengthen their strength as soon as possible was the right thing to do. When the inevitable war came, at least he would have the power to fight. The test site was chosen outside the town's walls. In order to not let the fugitives stray into the test site, Roland also mobilized the first army to isolate the surrounding area. The first to be tested was Lotus. Her age was similar to Nightingale. She had short black curly hair, and her facial features belonged to the type of a pretty daughter from a humble family, appearing very delicate. Her height was not high, only about 1.5 meters, and her body was thin. Compared to the tall nightingale, she simply looked like a little girl who had not yet fully developed, giving people a feeling of weakness. However, her ability wasn't weak at all. Within a range of 5 meters, she could easily change the terrain beneath her feet. The description in the letter was far less shocking than when he saw it with his own eyes. During the test, Lotus made the ground beside her rise vertically, as if it was an earth pillar that reached the sky. Only when it was about 7 or 8 meters high did this towering earth pillar collapse due to structural instability. According to her, the looser the ground, the less magic power it would take to transform it. But similarly, if the geology was too poor, the strength of the houses and walls built would also be very low. If the main composition of the ground was gravel, it would be very difficult to create anything decent. Obviously, she could only change the terrain, but not the material of the ground. Of course, this problem could be solved by expanding the growth range and thickness. Roland also asked her to demonstrate how to build a house. However, the soil in the western region was obviously not as dense as that in Sleeping Island. The mud house that rose from the ground collapsed several times when there were windows and doors left. In the end, they had to increase the thickness of the walls to about 0.5 meter. After the completion of the house, it was as simple and crude as a cave. It could only serve the most basic living functions. Compared to the orderly layout and compact structure of the brick house, it was much worse. But then again, even the worst cave house was better than a wooden shed that was leaking everywhere. At least in winter, a brazier and a brick bed could keep the house warm. If it was too late to build enough brick houses before the arrival of the months of the demons, they could make do with this kind of house. The last step was a comprehensive test. Lotus' ability was a typical summoning ability, without any branch ability. She could shape the terrain within a range of 5 meters from herself. When she used it, it was very easy to be affected by the god's stone of retaliation, but the formed ground would not shrink back. How is her magic power level? Roland asked. A brown cyclone with a very dense center. Among the witches, it's a very good level, Nightingale thought for a moment. It's close to Leaf's. What about the consumption rate? Upgrading the soil floor is still okay. She looked at the raised stone wall at the foot of the North Slope Mountain. When transforming the rock, the consumption of magic power is very fast. I'm afraid it can only last for 1 or 2 hours. Roland nodded. Leaf's magic power was ranked 3rd in the Witch Union, second only to Anna and Soroya. But having enough magic power was the prerequisite for continuous use of her ability. Of course, there were also low-consumption abilities like Nightingale and Lightning, which could be maintained for a whole day without any difficulty. After recording this information in his notebook, he began the second witch's test. Who wants to come? Me. Honey raised her hand. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. Then show me your ability first. The girl called Honey was also not tall, she was even a bit shorter than Lotus. Last winter, she had just become an adult, and her temperament looked very lively. Her short, fluffy brown hair was curled up like a fried dough twist. Her skin color was slightly darker, and around her neck, wrists, and ankles she wore a chain made of animal teeth. Her main ability was animal language, which could take effect on animals within the range of her ability. All kinds of animals that had been tamed by magic would carry out her instructions, but the range of the instructions could not exceed the animal's ability. After the task was completed, the taming would be cancelled, or she would take the initiative to cancel it. In addition, Honey also had a very interesting branch ability, Animal Messenger. She could pass the taming command to the target animal through the messenger animal. For example, she could summon a bird and let it find a more powerful animal to serve. Perhaps it was an old cat, or perhaps it was a fierce goshawk. This process was completely out of control, and the final result was also full of uncertainty. However, whether it was the main ability or the branch ability, they would all be affected by the god's stone of retaliation, especially the animal messenger, which could be directly erased by the god's stone of retaliation, allowing the animal to regain its freedom. In addition, the larger the tamed animal, the more magic power it would consume. In her own words, she could summon dozens of birds at the same time, but if the target was a cow, she could only control 2 or 3. The third witch to be tested was Evelyn. She was about 25 or 26 years old, with a standard King City accent, which sounded especially amiable. On the list sent by Tilly, it was written that she could transform poor-quality ale into other drinks with completely different styles and tastes, as long as she had tasted it before. As for this witch, Roland's purpose from the beginning was very obvious. That was to purify alcohol. Since she could turn watered ale into delicious wine or fruit wine, surely white wine shouldn't be a problem, right? For this reason, Roland had carefully prepared several bottles of packaged wine, the concentration of which ranged from 50% to 95%. It was a bit spicy, but it wouldn't be a problem if she only drank 1 or 2 mouthfuls. The key was to make her agree that this transparent liquid that burned her throat was indeed a kind of wine. However, the scorching sun in the wilderness wasn't a good place to taste wine. Without delicious side dishes, ice cubes, and crystal wine glasses, if he directly took out the pungent smell of white wine, others might even misunderstand it as poison. He intended to slowly influence her during dinner, so after simply asking Evelyn a few questions, he directly jumped to the next witch. Chapter 260. The fourth was Sylvie. In front of this witch, Roland always felt a little uncomfortable. It wasn't because Nightingale said that she lied too much. In modern society, except for relatives and good friends, few people would speak frankly. He had long been accustomed to all kinds of special effects of flattery and rumors. He just felt that in front of her, he had a feeling that he had nowhere to hide. What was worse, he knew that this was not an illusion, but the other party's ability. Her vision could ignore obstacles. As long as she wanted to, the clothes on her body were as good as nothing. Roland secretly lamented why he didn't have such an ability. He couldn't help but change his sitting position, crossing his legs. In terms of appearance, she could be regarded as the most unique of the 5 witches. She had long green hair that fell straight to her shoulders, and slender eyebrows that were faintly discernible under her bangs. Her amber eyes were so transparent that there was almost no depth to them. It was as if they were mirrors that reflected all the light outside. After looking at them for a long time, Roland always felt that a red mark would suddenly appear inside them. Sylvie's ability was very easy to understand. She could see everything around her, even behind her, and her vision could penetrate obstacles. The specific depth of vision depended on her thoughts. In addition, she also had a branch ability similar to Nightingale's. She could see the gathering and dissipation of magic. This made Roland feel a little surprised. If the branch ability could be so close, then what about the main ability? He asked Sylvie this question, but the latter hesitated and said that among the hundreds of witches on Sleeping Island, there was no one with the same ability. Nightingale gently pinched his left side to verify that this sentence was true. Perhaps it's because there are too few samples, Roland thought. The last witch to appear was Candle. She, like Anna, had ushered in her day of adulthood during the months of demons last year. When she was a minor, her ability could only be used on illuminating objects such as candles, lamp oil, and torches. After adulthood, her magic was stabilized, and the effect was greatly enhanced. She could maintain the original characteristics of the objects she touched for a period of time. For example, after casting the ability on an ice cube, it would not melt under the sun and would still emit bursts of cold air. At first glance, this ability seemed incredible and could achieve many things that could not be done by conventional means. However, after several rounds of testing, Roland found that it was not as perfect as he had imagined. First of all, it was a kind of enchantment ability, which required direct contact with the target. This limitation made it difficult for Candle to solidify some high-temperature objects. As a result, his plan to obtain a drop of molten steel that was always in a state of incandescence and could provide a continuous source of heat for the blast furnace failed. Apart from Anna, no one dared to touch something that was thousands of degrees Celsius with their hands. But if it became a thin wire, Candle could hold the other end and enchant it, but this led to another problem. That was, the farther the solidified state of the object was from its normal state, the greater the consumption of magic, and the shorter the duration of the effect. Roland used ice cubes to verify this point. After solidifying 2 ice cubes of the same size, one was placed on the hot ground, and the other was thrown into a basin of water. The former only persisted for half an hour before it quickly melted, while the latter still maintained its original shape even after the water temperature dropped to ice cold. This meant that if it was replaced with red-hot wire or steel, the effect would only be worse. Finally, the size was also a factor that restricted Candle's ability. Just like Hummingbird and Mystery Moon, the larger the object, the more magic it consumed. And according to Nightingale's observation, her own magic was in the lower middle level, like a golden mist, and had not yet formed a strong cyclone. But even so, this seemingly introverted girl was still Roland's biggest gain. In the field of industrial production, the solidified state of the object could be called a priceless treasure. The key lies in the word normal state. Under the influence of heating, cooling, friction, force, and other factors, the metal would fatigue and the structure would deform. He didn't need a drill that would become hot because of friction, nor did he need gears that were increasingly worn out. If the key parts of a machine could always be maintained in normal state, it meant that it could always maintain the highest efficiency and the highest precision. In other words, the burning flame could effectively improve the mechanical strength of inferior metals. Returning to the castle office, Roland once again browsed through the recorded abilities, and then began to plan the content of their future work. How is it? Nightingale poked her head out of the fog. Among these 5 witches, is there anyone you particularly like? All of them are not bad, Roland casually replied. What, you like all of them? He glared at the other, who stuck out her tongue and walked away with a piece of dried fish in her mouth. Obviously, at present, the most useful ones were Lotus and Candle. With the ability to transform the terrain, he could easily build a new earthen wall outside the city wall. In order to save materials and speed up the construction period, he chose to build the original rubble cement wall at the foot of the northern slope mountain, which was the closest pass to the Redwater River. Although this could be completed before the arrival of the months of demons, at the same time it also limited the scope of the town's westward expansion. With the continuous increase in population, the development of this wilderness and the concealing forest was only a matter of time. The new earthen wall would extend to the outer edge of the concealing forest, and at the same time include a part of the forest, so that the town would nearly double the area. As for the lengthening of the line of defense, it could be solved by expanding the source of soldiers and artificially guiding the direction of the demonic beast's attack. In any case, compared with last year's wooden spears and pre-loaded flintlocks, the current firepower of the First Army had undergone earth-shaking changes, and the defensive measures such as the battery and the redoubt could also be completed with the help of the new city wall. In addition, he also intended to let Lotus open a passage in the southern mountains, so that Border Town could directly reach the ford. In this way, the town would be able to obtain a natural harbor, and trade with the fjords would also be more convenient. Taking into account the huge magic consumption of transforming the rock formation, this project might take several months. Candle's job was to cooperate with Anna and Lucia to create a new generation of machine tools for the production of firearms and other mechanical equipment. If everything went well, Anna could also be freed from the tedious processing and production. Sylvie's task was very clear, mainly to explore the northern slope mine and the concealing forest. According to the miners, the northern slope mine had more than 100 natural caves, and no one knew where they ultimately led. So far, they had mined and cleared only 20 tunnels, but they had already found several kinds of ores. Roland was very curious about the credibility of the so-called ancient monster's lair. Now that he had a witch with the ability to see through things, he wanted to completely explore the northern slope mine, draw a detailed map, and let Lotus cooperate to adjust the terrain to improve the efficiency of mining. Chapter 261. As the sun set in the west, the rolling heat began to subside, and the cicadas that had been chirping all day also gradually quieted down. However, compared to Sleeping Island, which was surrounded by the sea, the castle was still a bit stuffy. Evelyn, covered in sweat, walked to the second floor. When she opened the bedroom door, a chill suddenly enveloped her. Today's test was very hard, a mature and capable woman with black hair said with a smile. How was it? Did it go well? Her name was Scroll, and she was the oldest witch in the Witch Cooperation Association. She was also a very kind senior. She had only known her for a short day, but she had already felt the care and concern of the other. I don't know, Evelyn replied with some frustration. Everyone else used their own abilities, but when it was my turn, His Highness only asked me a few questions and then let me go. Is it because he thinks I'm useless? Scroll brought over a glass of ice water. There is no useless ability, only undeveloped ability. This is what His Highness Roland often said to us, so you don't have to worry about this. But she took the glass, wanting to say something but hesitating. Worried that you won't be useful and will be left out in the cold? Scroll couldn't help but laugh. If it was the previous Witch Cooperation Association, it would be possible, but in Border Town, His Highness has never treated any witch differently. This hummingbird can testify. The girl who was buried in the closet looking for clothes looked up. That's roughly the case. Like me, Mystery Moon, Lily, and Miss Nana recently have nothing to do. His Highness even encouraged us to play Gwent cards to relieve our boredom. Relieve boredom? Evelyn stared. Well, incredible, right? Work hard when you have something to do, play happily when you have nothing to do. That's what he said. Hummingbird paused. But I think His Highness is still a little biased. He obviously treats Anna better. She was the first witch he knew, so his feelings for her were naturally much deeper. Scroll knocked on her head. Quickly clean your clothes, there won't be much water left later. Then she looked at Evelyn. You should also come with us. But the latter was stunned. To take a shower, Scroll smiled. In this season of summer, there is nothing more pleasant than standing under the shower. When Evelyn followed the two into the bathroom, she couldn't help but cry out in surprise. It was as if she had walked into a vast grassland. In front of her was a sea of clouds and mountains. The afterglow of the setting sun shone through the window and reflected on the wall, dyeing the clouds with a touch of gold. This is Soroya's masterpiece, Scroll laughed. This isn't a traditional decorative painting, you'll know when you take off your shoes. Evelyn carefully placed the wooden sandals in the shoe cabinet by the door. When she stepped on the grassland, barefoot, she immediately understood what Linley meant. The soles of his feet felt like lush green grass, and the tips of the grass were full of water droplets, as if it had just rained heavily. Scroll took off her clothes and let go of her ponytail, letting her long black hair cascade down. She walked to the wall and twisted the wrench. The shower head above her head suddenly sprayed out dozens of water lines, enveloping her. How is it? Very convenient, right? Hummingbird placed a round object in her hands. This is a bath product invented by His Highness. It feels great when used with a shower. Come, I'll teach you how to use it. When Evelyn returned to the room again, her whole body felt lighter. She had never experienced such a comfortable bath before. When she rubbed the soap on her body and washed it away with water, the sticky feeling on her body was immediately swept away, replaced by a refreshing and smooth feeling. After changing into clean clothes, the stuffy air seemed to cool down. When she lifted her arms, she could still smell the lingering scent of roses on her skin. Is this the daily life of a Witch Cooperation Association witch? Evelyn still couldn't believe it. She was born in the outer city of King City, and her family ran a tavern. Although most of the guests were farmers, their topics of conversation were always about the nobles in the inner city and their extravagant lifestyle. She had heard a lot of wine when she served the guests. For example, the golden bathtub filled with wine, and the milk bathtub sprinkled with rose petals. But even in their marvelous rumors, none of them could compare to her personal experience today. At least, Evelyn didn't think that bathing with wine and milk would be very comfortable. Thinking that the owner of the castle was a real prince, it was normal for him to pay attention to comfort and enjoyment. But the witches actually lived the same life as the royal family, which was simply unimaginable for her. One must know that before going to Sleeping Island, even maintaining an ordinary and peaceful life was an extravagant hope. Are you hungry? Scroll dried her hair and rebraided it. It's almost time to eat, let's go to the hall. In the living room on the first floor, a long square wooden table was already filled with all kinds of dishes. Evelyn roughly counted. There were 6 plates of meat, as well as egg custard, vegetable soup, and roasted mushrooms. It was no worse than last night's welcome banquet. After waiting for the other witches to arrive, everyone started to eat. She noticed that in addition to knives and forks, some people also used a pair of wooden sticks to pick up the food. His Royal Highness himself was the same. He rarely even picked up a knife and fork. The wooden stick in his hand flew up and down, looking very flexible. There were also no large pieces of steaks or whole chickens or ducks in the food bowls. Unlike the common food in the tavern, the steak was cut into small pieces, and the wild boar leg was removed from the bones, and was directly put into the mouth. When the dinner came to an end, His Royal Highness suddenly clapped his hands. I've recently researched 2 new things, and I intend to promote them as products, but I'm not sure how effective they will be. I want you to try them first, and if you have any opinions, you can put them forward. What are they, food? Okay, I want to try them. Amigo. The witches of the Witch Cooperation Association suddenly cheered. Evelyn blankly looked at Scroll, and the latter explained with a smile. His Royal Highness often invents some novel things, such as the soap you used before, as well as perfume, chopsticks, ice cream. Before he officially puts them into production, he will let us try them first. Ahem. The prince cleared his throat. The first thing is white wine. Compared to common ale and fruit wine, it has a mellow taste, and is more likely to get people drunk, so underage witches are not allowed to participate. Your Royal Highness, this is prejudice. Lightning shouted. I can drink more than those adult sailors. That's still not okay. Well, the little girl pouted, but Roland remained unmoved, and ordered the attendants to serve the white wine and distribute it to the adult witches. In front of Evelyn, there were also 3 glasses, and they were all filled with different kinds of wine. One glass was transparent and colorless, just like clear water. One glass was milky white, and the last glass was a sparkling orange-yellow. Under the flickering candlelight, they could also see some small floating objects, which looked like unfiltered fruit wine. They are white wine mixed with apple juice, white wine mixed with milk, and pure white wine, Roland introduced. You can add ice according to your own taste. The more you add, the lighter the taste of the wine. Then he smiled at Evelyn. You have been in King City's tavern, and your ability is to brew different kinds of wine, so I hope to hear your evaluation of this new wine. Evelyn's heart couldn't help but thump twice. She picked up the glass filled with orange wine and took a sip. Sure enough, as His Royal Highness had said, the taste of white wine was far stronger than that of ale. It was even a little sharp to the throat, and the tip of her tongue felt a trace of bitterness, but the fragrance of the apple diluted its influence. And finally the wine itself was mellow. Several flavors lingered in her mouth. It was the first time she had tasted such an excellent wine. The white wine mixed with milk was more gentle, and the bitterness had almost disappeared. She could taste, in addition to milk, there should also be some honey or sugar. The sweetness and the aroma of the wine mixed together, forming a new kind of taste. When it came to the last glass, Evelyn was already full of expectation. She took a small sip, and the burning feeling suddenly rolled over the base of her tongue and throat, just as she had expected. Without the interference of other tastes, only the pure taste of wine was left. First it was hot, and then under the bitterness there was a sweetness. The taste of these 3 glasses of wine is unforgettable. She put down the glass and took a breath. Your Royal Highness, some people may not be able to accept its strong and stimulating taste, but I think people who really love to drink should not be able to resist having such a mellow wine fragrance. Is that so? Roland laughed. That's good, but this glass is not the strongest white wine. I can still further enhance its mellow flavor. When the time comes you can taste it again. Did he choose me to come here to test his new wine? Although Evelyn was a little confused, she still answered, Yes, Your Royal Highness. After the wine glasses and plates were removed, His Royal Highness ordered the attendants to bring a pile of boxes, and then place them on the long table. This is the second new thing. It is also a small gift I intend to give you. He paused. A special piece of clothing. Chapter 262. After dinner, Nightingale took the box back to her bedroom, but before she could open it, Lightning, Maggie, Lily and Mystery Moon also jumped in. their eyes shining as they stared at the box in her hands. "What's wrong?" Vendi couldn't help but laugh. "Do you want to see what it is?" Except for Lily, the other three nodded. "His Royal Highness is biased," Lightning muttered. "It's fine if he doesn't let us drink the wine, but why didn't he even give us a gift?" "He said he would only give it to adult witches," Lily sighed. "You can ask him when you're an adult. And I don't care what's inside. Why did he drag me here?" "Hey," Mystery Moon was surprised. "I only called you once, I didn't pull you." Stop, that's not the point," Lightning shouted. "Mystery Moon is an adult, Maggie is also an adult, but they don't." "That's right, Coo." Maggie pushed aside the white hair covering her face and raised her chin in protest. "I also don't have Coo." "His Royal Highness has his own considerations." Nightingale also felt a little strange. Before, Roland had never treated everyone differently. Why did he choose to give the gift this time? "Let's see what's inside first." Opening the box, they saw a strange piece of clothing in front of them. It looked like a few cloth bands and a cloth bag, very soft to the touch. The material was obviously high-quality satin, but no matter how they looked at it, it didn't look like a piece of clothing because it was really too small. "There is a piece of paper at the bottom," Lightning shouted. Nightingale spread out the paper and found that it was written with the introduction of the gift and how to use it, and next to the method of use there was a picture. Vendi also opened her own box. "This thing is called a bra? It can relieve the weight of the chest, promote blood circulation, stabilize the posture, and at the same time reduce the discomfort of friction." Nightingale's voice became lower and lower, and she felt her cheeks suddenly become hot. This thing was actually used to support her chest? She couldn't help but look at Vendi, only to discover that all the other witches were also looking at her, revealing expressions of sudden realization. Lily couldn't help but laugh. "Now you know why you don't have any gifts, right? TSK, let me correct my previous statement. Lightning probably won't get this gift after she becomes an adult." "You speak as if there will be," Mystery Moon said, glaring at her. "I don't care." The latter rolled his eyes. "Is this like a corset?" Only Lightning was completely unmoved. Her eyes were filled with curiosity and envy. "Can you wear it for me to see?" "Of course not." Vendi showed a rare look of embarrassment. After driving all four of them out, she was slightly relieved. Why would His Highness suddenly give us this? Nightingale also felt a little embarrassed. It was okay if it was just a gift of underwear. Everyone usually wore and used clothes from the castle, so no one felt embarrassed. But this obviously had to be suitable for different people to wear. In other words, before Roland had carefully observed everyone's size. This thought made her blush, and she couldn't help but want to hide in the mist. By the way, if it was Anna, what would she do? "I'll leave and come back soon," Nightingale said as she spread out the mist, passed through the wall, and walked to the door of Anna's bedroom. After hesitating for a moment, she finally chose to knock on the door and enter. The door was quickly opened. Anna was wearing a nightgown, and her expression was the same as usual. "What's the matter?" I want to ask." Nightingale entered the room and turned around to close the door. "What do you think about the gift from His Highness?" "I've already put it on. It's very convenient." Anna's answer caught her off guard. "You've already put it on?" "Yes," Anna nodded. "Do you want to see it?" No need." She hurriedly waved her hand and hesitated. "I just want to ask, don't you think it's strange to give this?" "Why?" Anna was puzzled. "His Highness also said that he wants to promote this and sell it to more people as a product, so he needs us to help him try it on. And this is very good." She patted her chest. "It's soft and light. Except that the hook on the back is not easy to take off. It's much better than wearing an extra layer of underwear." "So that's how it is." Nightingale couldn't help but sigh in her heart. She didn't care about these trivial things at all, but focused on His Highness's goal. Perhaps this was what made her different, pure and direct. As a gift from Roland, Nightingale knew that she would try it anyway, so why was she still so shy? It was the same before. There was no need to hide at all. She could just tell him her thoughts openly. If it was Anna, she would definitely do the same, right? Thinking of this, Nightingale went back to her room, picked up the bra and studied it for a while. She hid in the fog, fastened it, put on her coat, and reappeared in front of Vendi. It's a little big. She tried to jump. But it's really a lot more comfortable to wear. At least I don't have to worry about the rough clothes and the pain in my chest. Also, it doesn't affect my movements at all, and I can save the chest belt. It's very convenient. You should try it. No, I don't need it. Vendi shook her head. How can that be? Nightingale chuckled and pulled her into the fog. I always feel that His Highness designed this dress because of you. Sylvie felt that she had seen more strange things today than she had seen in the past few years. Water flowed from a pipe with a flick of the switch, soap with a light fragrance, and white wine that burned her throat. But Evelyn still accompanied His Highness to drink all 3 cups. Of course, the most inconceivable thing was the gift of clothes after dinner. She knew that the nobles did have the practice of giving corsets, but other people would at least put on a corset dress. How could they directly give this? And even if it was given as a gift, it was usually given to someone very close, such as a lover. But listening to His Highness, it seemed that he not only wanted to give intimate clothes to witches, but also wanted to promote it and popularize it in the Western Territory. Sylvie couldn't help but shiver. Which noble would choose to personally do this business? Or, he had an extraordinary interest in breasts and buttocks. After Nightingale pulled Vendi into the fog, she could only vaguely see 2 vague shadows floating around the bed. Obviously, under the instigation and encouragement of the former, Vendi had accepted the gift. What about the other witches? Didn't they understand the meaning of giving intimate clothes? Thinking of Ashes's warning, Sylvie couldn't help but swallow her saliva. Chapter 263. A week later, Roland officially launched the steel bridge construction project. You mean you want me to raise 2 pieces of land in the middle of the river to act as footholds for the bridge piers? Lotus looked at the rolling river and asked in surprise, are you going to build a real bridge instead of using a pontoon to connect the 2 ends of the river? Yes. Roland spread out the roll of paper in his hand. Taking into account the impact of the river, the 2 pieces of land need to have a certain volume, and in order to reduce the impact, they need to be processed into this shape. This is the shape of a ship. Lotus looked back at the drawing. Yes, to be exact, it should be spindle-shaped. He nodded. As long as it is parallel to the direction of the current, it will receive the smallest impact. The problem is the Redwater River is nearly 10 meters deep. Can you make the bottom of the river rise? It's not difficult to do, Your Highness, Lotus simply replied. Leave it to me. For the sake of insurance, the ship responsible for carrying the witches was Little Town. The wide concrete hull of the ship moved in the river as if it was walking on flat ground. The helmsman was still lightning, and the sail power was provided by Vendi. However, in the last week, when the latter saw the prince, she would slightly avert her eyes, seeming somewhat uncomfortable. Until today, Roland finally saw her raise her head, looking straight at him as usual, and when they passed each other on the ship, he also heard her whisper, "Thank you. You have to give me credit for this," Nightingale whispered in his ear from the fog. Little Town quickly left the pier, heading towards the middle of the wide river. Carter had already pulled up the hemp rope on both sides of the river. The 2 red cloth strips tied to it were the expected positions of the bridge piers. After the cement ship moved to the first point, Lotus stood on the edge of the ship and began to display her ability. She saw that the river suddenly seemed to boil, surging upwards, forming a hill. Soon, gravel, grass, and mud emerged from the surging river, and the water gradually became turbid. So that's how it is, Roland thought. Her ability can not only transform the solid ground, but also the water, and raising the water surface is much easier than the loose gravel. Although the rising river water immediately rolled down in all directions, the riverbed had already been lifted up bit by bit. Not long after, a ball of greenish-gray soil floated to the surface of the water. It looked very soft and emitted an unpleasant stench. Everyone could not help but cover their noses. However, in Roland's eyes, all of this was top-notch fertilizer. Over the centuries, the bones of fish and other aquatic creatures, the water plants, and the excrement of the residents were deposited in the soil bit by bit. If it wasn't for the inconvenience of transportation, he would have liked to use the soil to fertilize the fields. Unfortunately, they could only be shoveled away manually and thrown directly into the river. Just like that, he cleared a layer and leveled it up. Finally, he saw the yellowish-brown solid soil. What followed next was to repeat this process until the two pieces of land were completely shaped. Roland estimated that this process would last for at least a week. However, just lifting the land out of the water did not mean that it could be used immediately. The flowing river would constantly carry away the sediment. Without any protection, even the spindle-shaped land would not last for more than a decade. He called Car Van Bate to his side and took out a charcoal pen. While drawing, he explained the next step to solidify the ground. "You mean, we should dig grooves at the edge of the land and then pour cement in?" the current Minister of Construction asked while gesturing at the drawings. No wonder he's an outstanding member of the King's City Mason Guild, Roland thought with satisfaction. With just a few simple reminders, he immediately understood my intention. Yes, the length of each section should not exceed 5 meters and the depth should be controlled at about 1 meter. After filling it with cement, let the witches lower this section of the groove by 1 meter. Repeating this process, you can form a cement wall that goes straight to the bottom of the riverbed. This plan was thought up by Roland after seeing Lotus' ability. Since she could control the ground to fall directly, then presumably she could also bring the structures built on the ground into the ground. "Your idea is really ingenious." Car's eyes lit up. In this way, even if the river washes away the soil on the outside, it will still be blocked by the tightly wrapped walls. Roland nodded. "The key point is to control the overall height of the sinking. If it is too little, it will lead to the bottom not being able to be wrapped tightly, and if it is too much, it will waste the cement and delay the construction period. You will be responsible for controlling this." "Yes, Your Highness," he replied. "Counting the silt and soft soil dug out, I estimate that the entire height should be about 12 meters. In addition, after surrounding the cement wall, the land in the middle should not be covered with cement. In the future, I will plant flowers and grass on it." The prince urged. "Plant flowers?" Carr was stunned. After all, these walls could not be watertight, and if they were to be built in sections, the walls would inevitably have even gaps. If he wanted to further stabilize the soil, the simplest way was to plant grass. Vegetation could balance the soil water content and reduce soil erosion, especially after Leaf had magically modified the super long root weeds, which could ensure that the soil was firmly consolidated together. After briefly explaining the role of plants in preserving the soil, Roland turned to look at the busy workers on the riverbank. "How is the construction of the bridge now?" "We are laying the cement gravel road," Carr reported without hesitation. "It should be completed this week." According to the plan, the bridge on both sides of the river would be made of rubble and cement, just like the Western Territory's city wall. As long as the positioning and measurement work were done, the construction itself would not be difficult. The bridge ramp was raised by a full 7 meters compared to the ground, and was connected to the city streets through a long gentle slope with an arc. With the height difference between the river embankment and the water surface, when the iron bridge was completed, it should be able to form a clear height of 10 to 12 meters from the Redwater River, which was basically enough for the sails of the river. At present, only one span of the main bridge had been completed, and it was currently being tested on the shore. Because the span was not large, the load was extremely low. Even if Roland knew nothing about bridge engineering, he was not worried about its reliability. In the era before the overloaded rear 8 wheels, the 30-centimeter high I-beam was a guarantee of stability. Even if it was crowded with people, it would still be impossible to break the steel beam. What's more, from the processing to the assembly and welding, Anna would take care of everything, so the probability of a shoddy construction was extremely low. Similarly, its installation was also very simple. After the 3 spans of the main bridge were prefabricated, Hummingbird would directly lighten it, and then hand it over to Lightning to hoist in place. When this steel bridge, which could allow 2 four-wheeled carriages to pass side by side, was erected on the Redwater River, the north and south banks would truly be connected as a whole. Even the greatest stonemason would find it difficult to imagine such a magnificent bridge. Looking at the sparkling wide lake, Carr sighed. "Your Highness, Does this steel bridge have a name? Chapter 264. Under the scorching sun, Sirius Daly, wearing a straw hat, walked along the riverbank, checking the growth of the wheat ears. After nearly 4 months of planting, the wheat was now basically mature. As far as the eye could see, the boundless wheat field was like a golden ocean. The ears of wheat were thick and plump, and not only did the number of caryopsis double, even the size of the wheat was bigger than any spring wheat he had seen before. Without waiting for the harvest to be weighed, Sirius knew that this year would be a bumper harvest. There was no doubt that this must be the work of the witches. He had accompanied his father in farming for 10 years, so he naturally knew what an ordinary wheat should look like. A wheat plant was divided into 1 to 3 ears, and each ear could produce 20 to 30 fruits. Whether the soil was fertile or not would indeed affect the size of the wheat, but directly doubling the number of caryopsis. Other than witches, he couldn't think of any other explanation. There were many other changes like this, such as the towering water tower in the town. He had observed those gigantic structures up close, and it was impossible to move a large iron bucket to an iron frame that was taller than a residential building with human strength alone, not to mention that they were built almost overnight. Nowadays, the townspeople living in the community rarely needed to carry a bucket to fetch water. As long as they turned on the faucet, the cool well water would pour out from the pipe. The same was true for the island, in the middle of the Redwater River. Since His Highness held the award ceremony, when Miss Nana was placed on the ceremonial platform, the use of witches became increasingly undisguised. Making a piece of land appear out of thin air on the empty river, this was obviously something only witches could do. He had asked the City Hall Director Barav about this matter, but the answer he got was that he didn't need to care, as His Highness Roland had his own ideas. Well, in any case, the royal family always liked to go against the church. Even if the latter sent an army to crusade against His Highness, they had to first defeat the first army before they were qualified to speak. Otherwise, the western region could only belong to Roland Wimbledon. Wasn't Duke Ryan the best example? Sir, you came. 2 serfs who were weeding in the fields saw Sirius Daly, and immediately came to greet him. You see, this wheat field is ready to be harvested, so we want to ask if what Sir Lord said before is still valid? Yes. The serf rubbed his hands nervously. Can we really be promoted to free people? As the person in charge of the Ministry of Agriculture, in addition to recording the best planting methods and calculating the harvest, Sirius also had another important responsibility: to communicate with the serfs, and to promptly preach the policies of His Highness and City Hall to them. Although he didn't like these country bumpkins who had to deal with mud all day, the knight's self-discipline allowed him to carry out his mission. Do you see those slogans? Sirius pointed at the banner beside the farmland. Sir, I don't understand. The serf smiled awkwardly. Labor creates wealth, and labor changes fate, he said. That is to say, as long as you work hard, you will have the opportunity to be promoted to a freeman. This is the promise made by His Royal Highness, and it will be fulfilled. Is that so? That's great. In addition, after becoming a free citizen, you can move into the town's central area, have your own brick house, and obtain the right to receive primary education. In the future, you don't need to ask me what these slogans mean. Sirius repeated the corresponding propaganda content. Yes, my lord. The serf nodded excitedly. The weather is hot. Do you want to go sit in my shed and drink a cup of cold water? No, you can go back to your work. He waved his hand, looked at the 2 people bowing their heads to thank him for a long time, and then returned to the field to continue with his previous work. This was the question Sirius had heard the most in the past month. No matter how much he preached, they would always take the trouble to ask again, as if they were afraid that the Sir Lord would cancel the policy in the blink of an eye. Not far away, someone surrounded him. Hello, Sir Sirius, after the wheat is harvested and dried, do we really only need to hand over 70%? Sirius sighed in his heart. The number of times this question appeared was second only to the promotion of a freeman. The first year is indeed like this, but in the future it will only become less and less. If you become a freeman, you only need to hand over 20%. This is what we have repeatedly emphasized. It would be great if we could really be promoted. One of the tall men touched the back of his head and said, then the remaining 30% of the wheat, it can only be sold to His Royal Highness, eaten by ourselves, or kept as seeds. Sirius clapped his hands, simply having them call over the surrounding serfs. Listen carefully, Border Town prohibits the private sale of food, whether it is sold to the local townspeople or to foreign merchants. It is a violation of Border Town's laws. If you do so, not only will your gains be confiscated, but you may also be imprisoned. What if the Lord only offers a very low price? The tall man muttered. Of course there won't be such a situation. His Royal Highness will purchase food at a stable market price. Whether it is a bad harvest or a good harvest, there won't be any significant changes. So you don't have to worry about not being able to afford to eat after selling the wheat, nor do you have to worry about harvesting too much, resulting in not being able to sell it or selling it at a low price. Sirius emphasized, in the whole of Border Town, there is only one place where you can sell food, that is the convenience market, and the manager of the market is our city hall. In the end, the prices? Rest assured, His Royal Highness will personally announce the purchase to you. Looking at the serfs dispersing in twos and threes, Sirius licked his dry lips and continued to inspect the crops. He didn't know how many of these people would keep his words in mind, but Sir Barev had clearly conveyed His Royal Highness' unyielding will. When the time comes, those who smuggle food will be severely punished. At this moment, a young serf broke away from the crowd, turned around and came back. My lord, he said while gasping for breath, I still want to ask you a question. Do you know where Miss May and Lady Irene went? He hesitated. Recently there have been no theatrical performances in the square. I want to ask you about their current situation. Are they sick? This was a fresh and interesting question. Sirius couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. If he hadn't happened to see them in the city hall, he really wouldn't have been able to answer. They went to Longsong's stronghold. Ah, the other side showed a disappointed look. Don't tell me they don't intend to stay in Border Town? They only went to the Stronghold Theater to perform. He shrugged his shoulders. And now the weather is so hot, you can't bear to see them standing under the sun, sweating profusely, right? When autumn comes, they will continue to return to the square to perform new plays. So that's how it is. Thank you, my lord. Looking at the young man's contented back, Sirius couldn't help but think of his own experiences in the past few months, from being a knight to a captive, and then from a captive to a city hall official. He didn't want to return to the Wolf family's territory, where there was nothing but a dilapidated house and a stretch of wheat fields. Becoming a knight was just a way to get rid of his father's life of farming. Chapter 265. The first batch of wheat planted in Border Town finally ushered in the harvest day. Under the scorching sun, the serfs used sickles to cut the wheat stalks, bundled them up and transported them to the other side of the river. Roland knew that the process from ear to kernel was a very tedious one. Before mechanical farming tools and combine harvesters became popular, the wheat needed to be separated, cleaned, screened, and dried manually. Now, he once again witnessed this process. After the wheat stalks were transported back to the camp, the serfs spread them flat on the ground to dry, and then used a variety of tools, wooden sticks, stones, and rakes, to repeatedly beat the wheat stalks and ears, so that the carrions could be peeled off. This process often lasted for 3 or 4 days. In Roland's memory, in the countryside, oxen or donkeys were used to pull the stone mill to press the wheat stalks back and forth, which not only saved a lot of effort, but also made the peeling process more uniform. It had to be said that the level of agriculture in Border Town was really too backward. After beating, it was time to turn the situation around. If there was no fork, they would use a wooden stick instead, or they would directly grab the wheat stalks with both hands and throw them into the sky, just like stir-frying vegetables. After the early beating, most of the carrions had been broken, and this process separated the fruit from the wheat stalks. The threshed wheat stalks actually had many uses. After being crushed, they could be returned to the field, used as livestock bedding, or made into fodder and paper. But Roland had no time to develop the green industry at the moment, so he could only watch the serfs pile the wheat stalks by the river and burn them all. In the next few days, gray smoke fluttered over the town all day long, comparable to the previous cement powder pollution. At the same time, the two spindle-shaped islands of the Redwater Bridge had also been cleaned up, and the construction of the water-retaining wall was carried out as planned. The foundation piers were prefabricated in the same way as the main bridge. First, concrete columns containing shaped steel and steel bars were poured in the open space, and then weight reduction hoisting was carried out. Finally, Lotus was responsible for sinking it into the soil, leaving only half of the steel plate exposed, waiting to be connected to the bridge. Therefore, during this week, Roland basically wandered between the Redwater Bridge and the threshing ground, and his skin was tanned a lot. After the wheat stalks were forked out, there was only a layer of wheat grains and husks left in the threshing ground. The serfs swept them together and piled them up into hills, then stood on the hills, scooped up the mixture with shovels, and threw it into the open space in front of them. Because the husks were much lighter than the fruits, they fell farther to the ground when the wind blew. Therefore, the grains were scattered under their feet, while the husks and debris were scattered far away. Using this method, they collected the grains step by step. Of course, it was impossible to completely clean the chaff, and in the process, the grains would be mixed with mud and gravel. Therefore, Roland made up his mind to prepare a batch of farm machinery for next year's harvest. He probably couldn't make a combine harvester, but a sheller was quite easy to make. He just needed to replace the stone mill with a millstone, install a screen under it, and use a blower to separate the broken chaff. When the plump wheat grains were evenly spread on the threshing floor, it seemed as if the entire northern bank of the Redwater River was dyed with a layer of gold. Looking at these golden fruits, Roland's heart was filled with a sense of accomplishment. Regardless of whether the harvested grain was enough to fill the stomachs of more than 10,000 people, at least for Border Town, this was a memorable day. From today onwards, the grain in his territory would gradually change from being completely dependent on imports to being self-sufficient. After drying for 3 days, the wheat entered the stage of bagging and weighing. "Your Highness, this time we had a great harvest." That afternoon, Bhairav excitedly ran into the office. According to the preliminary statistics of the City Hall, the yield per mu of each responsible field is at least 4 times higher than in the past, and the highest is currently 6 times higher. In this way, this year's harvest is enough to fill the stomachs of the subjects. Really? Roland couldn't help but laugh. It seems that the newly built granary in the castle district won't always be empty. Do you know what this means? The expression of the City Hall director seemed to be even more excited than Roland. Border Town only needs to add another 2,000 farmers to meet the food consumption of 50,000 to 60,000 people. This is incredible. Border Town can completely expand into the largest city in Grey Castle. No. He paused for a moment. The most magnificent city on the continent. In this era, the main reason why the urban population could not increase was the low production capacity of grain. A large city like King City, which had a population of more than 20,000, already required dozens of villages to provide food for it. Each village had a population of about 1,000 to 2,000. If half of them were engaged in farming, the total number of people would be 20,000. In other words, the grain produced by a farmer could not only feed himself and his family, but also one city resident at most. This was the so-called invisible constraint on productivity. It was hard for Bhairav to imagine that after mechanized farming was popularized, the output of just one person would be enough to feed tens of thousands of people. The main reason why Border Town could achieve such a great harvest without the promotion and development of agricultural technology was the golden ones modified by Leaf. Using as few farmers as possible to feed as many people as possible, liberating human resources from the farmland and putting them into industrial production, this was the strategy that Roland had decided on from the very beginning. Now that the Ministry of Agriculture had obtained the best planting process, and in the coming years, iron farming tools and machinery would be used in farming, the per capita output would definitely increase. In the evening, Roland held a bonfire speech by the Redwater River. Time seemed to have returned to that dusk 4 months ago. It was still the same bonfire, the dense crowd, and the last trace of the afterglow on everyone's faces. The only difference was the expression on everyone's face. Compared to the fear and uneasiness they had felt when they first arrived, their faces were now brimming with joy and unconcealable expectation for the harvest. Roland waved his hand downward, and the scene immediately quieted down. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the prince to fulfill his promise. "I know what you want to hear." Roland did not follow his usual practice of first putting his name and title. Instead, he said straightforwardly, "I can also tell you without a doubt that the promotion rules announced before are still valid and will continue." His words ignited the atmosphere. The crowd could not help but shout. Many people knelt down and praised the prince's benevolence. "Long live the Lord! Long live His Royal Highness!" After the grain has been handed in, the promotion list will also be announced. Roland waited until the cheers subsided a little, then continued, "City Hall will be responsible for the arrangements after you become free people. You can choose to continue farming or find another job in the town. In addition, from next year, as long as the harvest meets the promotion standards, even if the output is not among the top, you can still become free people. In other words, as long as you work hard, you can definitely get rid of the status of a serf. As I said, labor creates wealth, and labor changes fate." He paused for a moment and looked around. "I hope that one day in the future, there will be no more serfs in Border Town, and everyone can become my real subjects." Chapter 266. Timothy Wimbledon walked into the arched round room at the top of the Lord's Tower in the port of Clearwater. Unlike the common castles, this tower building was taller and narrower. In addition to dealing with government affairs and sightseeing, it was impossible to even summon ministers to hold court. The furnishings in the room had not been moved at all, as if the owner had just left and would soon return. Directly facing the entrance was a reddish-brown square table. The books on the table were arranged neatly, and there were a few unfinished manuscripts in the center. The quill was inserted into the ink bottle, and one could pick it up to continue writing. He walked step by step to the table and sat in the wide chair. The chair was covered with a cushion made of bamboo, very suitable for relieving the heat of the summer. There was also a large bucket of water next to the chair, obviously used to place the ice on, to cool down and dispel the heat. However, today's weather was a bit gloomy, and the dark clouds over the sea were very low, so the room did not feel stuffy. Timothy leaned over, put his face on the table, and gently sniffed. A faint fragrance entered his nostrils. This was the fragrance of Garcia's favorite blue sunflower, which was produced in Coldwind Ridge. Compared to rose and rosemary, it contained a unique coolness, as if the ice and snow of the northern region had been melted into it. Only by using an object for a long time could it be infected with one's own smell. There was no doubt that his sister was always like him, sitting in the chair with her hands on the table, listening to reports from her subordinates, or writing government decrees. Thinking of this, he could not help but laugh. In the end, Timothy simply leaned on the back of the chair, looked up and laughed loudly. He finally won. Garcia gave up the port of Clearwater, gave up the Southern Territory, which was equivalent to giving up the throne of Grey Castle. Since he found out that the Black Sail Fleet was moving north along the coastline, he immediately summoned his subordinates, drove more than 5,000 slaves, rats, and criminals straight to the Southern Territory, and launched an attack on Garcia's nest, the port of Clearwater. The only resistance came from the Sand Nation in the extreme south. He did not know what kind of promise this group of people had received, but one by one they rushed forward as if they did not care about their lives. But the trouble was, they also had berserk pills. This battle lasted for nearly half a month, during which Timothy took advantage of his numerical advantage to disintegrate the opponent's counterattack time and time again, and constantly nibbled away at the Sand Nation's line of defense. Nearly 3,000 people died in the war of attrition. If not for the influence of the pills, this motley crew would not have dared to step onto the battlefield, let alone fight the savage and ferocious Sand Nation head-on. The result of the battle was that he had crossed over layers of corpses and climbed up to the Lord's Tower of the port of Clearwater. The Queen of Clearwater had become history, and the southern border of Grey Castle had finally returned to his control. "Your Majesty?" The knight who was guarding outside the door probably heard Roland's carefree laughter. It doesn't matter. Timothy got up, tilted his head, and motioned for him to follow him. Then he went up to the balcony from the side door of the roundhouse. The slightly salty sea breeze blew against his face, and his robe fluttered in the wind. The dark clouds in the distance were getting thicker and thicker, as if a heavy rain was approaching. What a pity, he thought. He had originally planned to see his sister's port, dock, and Lord's Tower turn into ashes in the raging flames, but it seemed that he would not be able to do so. For the past 6 months, he had been leading troops on expeditions, and had almost never stayed in King's City for a full month. All of the government affairs were entrusted to the Prime Minister. Although Marquis Wyke seemed to be very loyal, but loyalty did not mean that he would always be able to resist temptation. Gerald Wimbledon was the best example. He had to return to King's City as soon as possible and stabilize the political situation. But the rain in the south would last for several days, and he could not wait until then. "I will leave for King's City early tomorrow morning," Timothy said. "In addition to my personal guards and King's City Knight Regiment, the rest of the knight and mercenaries will be under your command. Sir Ed Hawes, guard the southern border for me, and don't let the Sand Nation take a single step into Grey Castle." "You want me to stay here?" The young knight from the Hawes family in the north was startled. "But I still want to continue fighting for you, Your Majesty." "Guarding the border is also fighting for me, sir," Timothy interrupted. "Listen, there are still many things to do here, so I have to leave behind a loyal and capable person to deal with the aftermath." "But..." Ed seemed a little hesitant. "I know what you are worried about." The new king smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "Rest assured, you won't always stay here. When the matter of the port of Clearwater is over, I will immediately transfer you back to King's City. Grey Castle is still not unified, and before recovering the Western Territory, I need more knight to fight for me. How could I forget you here?" He raised his head, his eyes shining, and then he knelt down on one knee and shouted, "Yes, Your Majesty." "Get up," Timothy nodded with satisfaction. "There are 3 main things you have to do next. The first is to escort all the residents of the port of Clearwater to King's City." "Don't you want to hang these traitors?" the knight asked in surprise. "No, they are not the real traitors. If they were really on Garcia's side, they would have already left with the Black Sail Fleet. If I kill these people, I will only be playing into her hands." However, the influence of his sister was really beyond his expectations. With more than 10,000 people in the port, plus the slaves captured from Eagle City, in the end there were only more than 400 people who were unwilling to leave. If it weren't for the Sand Nation's desperate resistance, this port would be no different from an empty city. "Your Majesty is merciful." The second thing is to burn the dock, shipyard, and the Lord's Tower. I want everyone in the Southern Territory to see that Garcia's lair no longer exists. Even if she comes back, she will only get ruins. "Yes," the knight replied. "The last thing is to collect refugees for me." Timothy looked at the sky and the sea and calmly said, "Any homeless people, rats, bandits, or even Sand Nation will do." Since the Battle of Eagle City until today, the disputes in the Southern Territory have never subsided, so there should be a large number of refugees in the surrounding villages and towns. It doesn't matter how you collect them, but before the start of the war to suppress the Western Territory, you must at least provide me with a team of 5,000 people. Garcia's escape proved the correctness of his strategy, which was to use more than half of the population of Grey Castle to consume the strength of the rebels. Under normal circumstances, a team of about 100 knight would lead thousands of civilians to launch an attack. The knight would not participate in the battle, but was only responsible for distributing the pills and commanding the battle. In the face of an absolute advantage in numbers, as long as they continued to consume the population, the one who would not be able to hold on would be the enemy. Garcia's retreat was a decisive performance. If she had stubbornly defended the port of Clearwater, she would inevitably be swallowed up by the crazy civilians who had swallowed the pills. Chapter 267. Your Majesty, why hasn't there been any news from my brother? Ed's words made Timothy slightly surprised. Indeed, it had already been 2 months since Lehman Hawes had been sent to loot the Western Territory. Taking into account the journey back and forth, he should have already reported the situation or returned to King City. Although one of the tasks given to Lehman was to seize control of the Western Territory as soon as possible, Timothy was clear that after taking the pills, the 1,500 people were almost useless. Relying on them to occupy the Western Territory was unlikely, so the main goal was still to seize the pills in the Stronghold Church, find out the details of the Duke's battle, and finally attack Border Town to consume a round of Roland's forces. This was a tried-and-true method to deal with Garcia. Even if they didn't capture the port of Clearwater, and the militia was completely annihilated, most of the Knight's troops would be able to return safely. As long as they gathered a group of useless people, they would be able to continue the attack. But why has there been no news from Lehman Hawes and the Knight's troops? Maybe he delayed his return because of the attack on Border Town, or maybe he's on his way back, Timothy slowly said. These reasons were obviously not very convincing, but he didn't want to say the most likely answer in front of Lehman's brother. Maybe when I return to King City, I'll receive news from him. Your Majesty, when the time comes, can you please tell you his news? Timothy nodded. Of course, I'll send a messenger to deliver it. Thank you, Your Majesty. The new king leaned against the railing, looking at the occasional bright light in the dark clouds. The sound of thunder seemed to come from far away. It wasn't loud, but it was dull and vigorous, as if it directly pounded on his heart. Ed's question made the joy in his heart fade a lot. If Garcia Wimbledon's resistance was a matter of course, and Tilly Wimbledon's departure made him disappointed, then Roland Wimbledon's actions were completely unimaginable. He had thought that he did not need to spend any effort to pay attention to his incompetent younger brother. After a while, he would get tired of living in a poor town and come to the capital. However, the actual situation was completely beyond his imagination. He stayed behind in Border Town, survived the months of the demons, defeated the Duke of Ryan, seized Longsong's stronghold, and even completely lost contact with Lehman's 1,500 militia. How did he do it? Timothy didn't have a deep understanding of his younger brother. When he was a child, neither Garcia nor Gerald liked to play with him. When he was an adult, they would only see each other once at the palace banquets. However, rumors of his naughty and mischievous deeds still lingered, and even his father didn't like him very much. Could it be that he had been hiding his true nature from the very beginning? Timothy quickly rejected this idea. Even if she was as smart as Fifth Sister, she was only good at learning and quick thinking. Her childhood personality was no different from that of an ordinary girl. How could a person be born with the ability to hide and deceive? Something must have happened to him after he went to Border Town, which caused this change. Timothy shook his head and put these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. What's wrong, Your Majesty? No, it's nothing. The new king took a deep breath. The storm is coming. No matter what he encountered, Border Town's population and location made it impossible for him to retreat. There was no port, no fleet, and behind him was a barbarian land that he couldn't set foot in. He could only defend that corner until he was exhausted by his own offensive. Do you insist on leaving tomorrow? The knight asked worriedly. If I stop in the face of a little rain, how can I face the real storm? Timothy turned and said, sooner or later, Roland Wimbledon would kneel at his feet and beg for forgiveness. The crown of the King of Grey Castle would inevitably be firmly placed on his head. However, this was just the beginning. The church's movements and intentions were becoming more and more obvious. One day, Grey Castle would fight against the church, and that would be the real challenge. Go and do your work. The sooner you complete the task I gave you, the sooner you can return to King City. Yes, Your Majesty. Ed took 2 steps, then turned back and asked, I almost forgot, Your Majesty, what should we do with those who swallowed the pills and didn't die on the battlefield? This is the 3rd time they've taken the pills. Let them be incinerated along with the port of Clearwater, he replied with a blank expression. The knight took the order and left. Timothy suddenly felt a chill on the tip of his nose. He raised his head and saw rain falling from the clouds. At first, it was sparse, but then it became denser and denser, and soon it set off a series of ripples on the sea. Asterisk at the top of the Tower of Babel in the new holy city of Hermes. Damn it. Damn it. Tayfun slammed the table and said, "That son of a bitch. Blasphemer. How dare she target the church?" This was the first time that Maine had seen the old bishop lose his composure. The blue veins on his forehead bulged, his beard trembled with anger, and his face was so ferocious that it seemed as if he wanted to swallow the other person alive. It was hard to imagine that the old bishop, who usually complained about Heather, would quarrel with her for an entire afternoon, but when he saw the jewelry box sent by the Queen of Clearwater, the old bishop broke out in an astonishing rage. There were no pearls in the jewelry box, only an iron ring, which was the bishop's emblem personally awarded by the Pope, and the ring was worn on a blood-stained broken finger. Maine sighed and reached out to close the jewelry box. Of course she dares, because we haven't obtained the blessings of God. God only favors the winner. This sentence immediately calmed Tayfun down. He sat back in his chair without saying a word, gasping for breath, and finally forced out a sentence, "What are you going to do next?" This was indeed a situation that the church had never encountered in the last 100 years. No one would have thought that Garcia would travel thousands of miles from Grey Castle to the Kingdom of Endless Winter, and after capturing King's City, she would also send the Black Sail Fleet to approach Hermes. Although Wolfshart City was on the verge of being captured, Maine didn't hesitate to transfer all of the gods' punishment army back to the old holy city. This city without walls was the barrier of Hermes, and under no circumstances could it be lost. After the offensive stopped, the Black Sail Fleet also didn't continue to advance, but instead returned to King's City along the river. Obviously, the other party's intention was very obvious. As long as the church sent a large army to attack Wolfshart, Garcia would attack the holy city from the river. The sudden intervention of this royal power made the nobles of the Kingdom of Endless Winter restless. Maine believed that as long as he could let these greedy people continue to keep their territory and property, they would not hesitate to support Garcia as the new Queen of Endless Winter. Today's predicament was not something he could easily solve. But the church wouldn't be subdued by this kind of difficulty. Long before he became the bishop, he had already understood that he would have to walk on a thorny road. First of all, the holy city needs a new bishop. You first make a list of candidates, and the final candidate will be decided by the Pope, Maine slowly said. What about the enemy? Tayfun snorted through his nostrils. Chapter 268. Passing through the dark corridor, Maine rode the cage into the huge hole deep underground and came to the front of the pivotal secret temple again. His Majesty O'Brien was already waiting at the door. He looked older than the last time. His eyes were sunken in, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes spread across his cheeks like a spider web. However, his smile was still gentle and full of concern. Maine couldn't help but feel tears welling up in his eyes. He knelt in front of him. "Your Holiness, get up, child." The Pope's voice was calm and steady. "I heard you're in trouble? Let's talk in the hall." Today was not the day of conversion, so there were no candles lit along the walls in the hall. There were only candlesticks placed in a few corners. The Pope returned to the main seat and took a deep breath. "Tell me what happened outside?" Maine was well aware of the importance of His Holiness O'Brien's responsibilities. It was not that he did not know what was happening outside the holy city, but that he did not have the time to deal with these trivial matters. That was why he had set up 3 archbishops to jointly manage the church affairs. He should try his best to avoid disturbing Her Holiness with these things, but he was powerless to solve the current troublesome situation. Maine quickly recounted what had happened from beginning to end. "Heather is dead." O'Brien was silent for a long time after listening to the story. Then he sighed. "She was an observant, clever, and devout little girl. I watched her slowly grow up." "My condolences, Your Holiness. The murderer will definitely be punished." The Pope nodded. "So, the current situation is that Garcia and the Kingdom of Wolfshart are helping each other? The new poison didn't work? It played a miraculous role in the capture of Broken Tooth Castle. The defenders managed to hold out for a month before all of them died. The army of judges quickly broke into the city, and there were almost no living people in the residential area. However, when we attacked Wolfshart City, the poison didn't seem to have the same effect. Now, the enemy's resistance is still tenacious. Maine reported. You made 2 mistakes, Brian said slowly. The illness caused by the poison will cause death within 7 to 10 days. You should have taken advantage of the first peak of the illness to launch an attack, and then quickly treated the residents in the city. This would have greatly reduced their hostility. Don't forget that we need as many people as possible, not empty cities. The second point is to wait a month before taking action. Although it can minimize the casualties, it will also give the enemy enough time to react and find a way to cure the disease. The essence of the new poison is demonized demonic beasts. According to the Holy Book of Magic, there are more than 70 kinds of abilities that can restrain its infection, and more than 30 kinds of abilities that can directly kill it. It's not surprising that such a witch would appear in a city with tens of thousands of people. You mean, they colluded with witches? At the moment of life and death, who cares if they are the devil's minions or not? The Pope said calmly, regardless of whether this witch took the initiative to stand out, or was exposed and forced to treat the disease, it is not good news for the Church. If they can really stop our attack, the reputation of the witches in the kingdom of Wolfheart will change dramatically. They might even be regarded as heroes. It's all my fault, Maine said, bowing his head in pain. It is indeed a mistake, but it is not serious. You formulated such a strategy in order to reduce the losses of the army of judges and the God's punishment army. Brian tapped Roland's shoulder with his scepter. Moreover, the 3 princesses of Grey Castle and the king of Wolfheart are gathered together. This is also an opportunity for us. Opportunity? Meeting? The bishop was startled. Yes, an opportunity to catch them all in one fell swoop. Brian stood up. Come with me. Under the guidance of the guards, Maine followed the Pope out of the pivotal secret area and slowly walked into the depths of the cave. The huge god stone of retaliation emitted a dim light, illuminating the path under their feet. Gradually, the light became dimmer and dimmer. Maine could not help but look back, only to see that the pivotal secret temple and the god's stone had already been left far behind. At this time, the guards also lit torches to avoid tripping on the gravel on the ground. Where are we going? We have arrived, child. His Holiness O'Brien stopped, breathing a little quickly. Phew, I'm getting old. It's so tiring to walk such a short distance. A guard came forward to support him. Your Holiness, let me carry you. It's okay. I just need to rest. He stood still for a while and then ordered, light the brazier. At this time, the bishop noticed that there were several towering iron shelves erected on the side of the stone path. If it weren't for the guards holding torches approaching them, it would have been difficult for most people to discover these metal objects hidden in the darkness. The guard climbed up the ladder and lit the turpentine basin at the top. Several dazzling flames suddenly spurted out. Maine first squinted his eyes, and after adapting to the change in light, he looked forward. In the flickering light of the fire, a dusty canvas appeared in front of everyone. It bulged high, and it was obvious that a huge object was covered under it. I originally planned to use it in the last 2 years to resist the increasingly ferocious demonic beasts, but now it seems that it will have to be activated in advance. Brian waved his hand. Take off the cloth. This is... As the canvas fell, Maine could not believe his eyes for a moment. It was a huge, ferocious-looking 4-wheeled iron carriage. Just one of its wheels was taller than him. It did not have a carriage, only a terrifying metal ram and a beast bone frame. In the middle of the frame was a bone shield that was full of barbs. It was as big as 3 or 4 doors. 2 perfectly straight iron poles, one on the left and one on the right, stretched out from the openings on the shield. They pointed straight forward, like sharp arrows that were ready to be shot. On both sides of the iron carriage, there were dozens of such iron poles. Each pole was as thick as his thigh, reflecting a dull metallic luster under the brazier. In the Holy Bible it is named the siege beast. The Pope walked to the side of the iron carriage and patted the solid iron pole. It can only be activated by magic, and it requires 3 or 4 witches to operate properly. The attack range of the siege beast is far greater than that of a catapult or a ballista. It would be very difficult for an ordinary city wall to withstand the destruction of iron arrows. A sailboat made of giant wood would be like thin paper in front of it. Whether it is destroying the strong walls of Wolfshart City or blocking the advance of the Black Sail Fleet, it would be a piece of cake for it. This is also a weapon developed by the Pivotal Secret Temple? No. O'Brien shook his head. You should be able to guess that it comes from our enemies, the devils of the abyss of hell. This is also the reason why the church hid the siege beast in the depths of the cave. Remember, when you use it, you must do your best to hide your whereabouts and not let the civilians see what it looks like. I understand. Maine bowed his head. Why can the devil's weapons be controlled by witches? Could it be that they also have the same magic as humans? He suppressed the doubts in his heart and did not continue to ask. It was obvious that he would only be qualified to understand these things after he became the new pope. In addition, in order to prevent Garcia and the Wolf King from escaping again, I will send 2 pure witches to assist you in battle. The pope said in a solemn voice, no one can escape from their hands. Go, use the blood of these blasphemers to send Heather off. His Holiness the Pope's pure witches. His heart trembled. The witches raised by the church and survived were all called pure witches, but the witches under the Pope's command were the strongest ones selected from thousands of people. Their abilities were not even recorded in the Holy Bible of Magic. Compared to Heather, Tayfun, and the few witches under his command, there was a world of difference. Now that His Holiness had personally said that they couldn't escape, the fate of the 2 had already been decided. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.